hadn't planned on staying alone. The trip was supposed to be for 3 of us. Me, Matt, and Josh. A long weekend in a remote cabin by the lake, fishing, drinking, and just getting away from everything. But things didn't work out that way. Matt's car broke down the night before, and Josh got called into work last minute. I almost canceled too, but the reservation was already paid for, and I figured a few days of peace and quiet wouldn't hurt. The cabin was about a 4-hour drive from home, deep in the woods. It sat right on the edge of a small lake, the kind of place that was postcard perfect in the daytime but eerily empty at night. The nearest town was about 40 minutes away, and once I turned off the main road onto the dirt path leading to the cabin, there was nothing but trees on either side. The sun was already low by the time I arrived, casting long shadows over the narrow road. The place looked just like the pictures, small but solid, built from old wood with a wraparound porch and a fire pit out front. There was a short dock leading out onto the lake and an old rowboat tied to it. The water was completely still, smooth like glass, reflecting the trees on the other side. No neighbors, no other cabins in sight, just me and the woods. I brought my bags inside and set everything down in the main room. It was simple but comfortable. One big space with a kitchen on one side, a couch and an old stone fireplace on the other, and a single bedroom in the back. The walls were lined with shelves full of dusty books, and a few old hunting trophies hung above the fireplace. The air inside had that slightly damp, musty smell of a place that doesn't get used often. The first thing I did was check my phone. No signal. I expected that, but it still made me uneasy. I could probably get service if I drove back toward town, but out here, I was completely cut off. There was a landline in the cabin, an old rotary phone sitting on a side table, but I had no idea if it even worked. After unpacking, I stepped outside to get some air. The lake was silent, no ripples, no sounds of fish jumping. The woods were quiet too, except for the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind picked up. I stood there for a while, just listening, watching the water turn dark as the sun dipped below the trees. That first night, I didn't sleep well. The bed was comfortable enough, but every time I started to drift off, some sound would wake me up. A branch cracking outside, the wind whistling against the windows, the cabin creaking as it settled in the cold. I kept telling myself it was normal, that old places like this always made noises, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At some point in the night, I woke up to a new sound, something tapping, light, rhythmic, like fingers drumming against glass. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. It was coming from the front of the cabin, near the porch. I held my breath and listened. The tapping stopped. I stayed completely still, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. The wind had died down. The woods were silent. I told myself it was probably a branch swaying in the breeze, hitting the window. But I knew that wasn't true. There hadn't been any wind for hours. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window. I felt stupid for letting my imagination get to me. It was my first night alone in an unfamiliar place. That was all. I spent the next day trying to relax. I fished off the dock for a while but didn't catch anything. Walked a little ways into the woods, but not too far. The trees were thick, and without a trail, it was easy to lose your sense of direction. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't anything I could explain, just this nagging feeling that someone was nearby, just out of sight. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see movement between the trees, but there was nothing. That night, I locked the cabin up tight, bolted the door, pulled the curtains shut. I kept the fireplace going, more for comfort than warmth. The glow of the fire made the room feel smaller, safer. But then the tapping started again. I was sitting on the couch, reading one of the old books from the shelf, when I heard it. Light, deliberate. This time, it wasn't on the window. It was on the door. I froze. My skin went cold. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch. Someone or something was tapping on the door. I sat there, gripping the book so hard my fingers ached, waiting for it to stop. And then I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. One step, then another, wood creaking under the weight. I stood up as quietly as I could, my heart hammering. I didn't want to move, but I had to see. I reached for the fireplace poker, gripping it tight in one hand. Then, taking a deep breath, I crept toward the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The porch was empty. The tapping had stopped. The footsteps had stopped. But then, from just beyond the glow of the firelight, I saw movement. Someone was standing at the edge of the trees. I could barely make out the shape. Tall, unmoving, watching. I didn't breathe, didn't move, just stood there staring. My pulse throbbed in my ears. And then, slowly, the figure turned and walked back into the woods. I stayed awake all night, listening. But nothing else happened. No more tapping, no more footsteps. At first light, I packed my things, threw everything into the car, and left. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I know one thing for sure. I was not alone in those woods. I never wanted to go on that trip. It wasn't my idea. A few friends and I had planned to spend a long weekend up in the mountains, renting a cabin far from the city, just to get away for a while. But as the weekend got closer, one by one, people started backing out. Work, family stuff, last-minute excuses. In the end, it was just me. Could have canceled, but I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe I just wanted some time alone. I told myself it would be relaxing. No responsibilities, no distractions. Just me, the quiet, and a few days of fresh air. The cabin was in a remote area, a couple of hours' drive into the mountains. The last stretch was a dirt road that wound through thick trees, barely wide enough for my car. The sun had already started setting by the time I arrived, the last bit of light filtering through the pines, casting long shadows across the porch. I parked, grabbed my bag, and stepped out. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The cabin itself was nothing special, just a single-story wooden structure, weathered but sturdy, with a slanted tin roof and a small front porch. It had been a hunting cabin at some point, and the inside reflected that. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, an old table, and a couch that looked like it had been there for decades. There was no electricity, but there was a propane stove and a small lantern. I lit it, its dim glow barely reaching the corners of the cabin. I checked my phone, no signal. That wasn't surprising. The nearest town was miles away, and I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour before I arrived. It didn't bother me at first. I had firewood, food, and enough water for a few days. The quiet was nice. I unpacked, set up my sleeping bag on the old cot in the corner, and heated up some canned soup on the stove. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. The sound was constant, a low whisper that never really stopped. I was used to city noises, traffic, sirens, people, but this was different. This was the kind of quiet that made you hear everything. Every small creak of the cabin, every shifting branch outside. I went to bed early. There wasn't much else to do, but sleep didn't come easy. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something had pulled me out of sleep, but I didn't know what. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. The wind was still going, steady as before. Then a sound, faint but distinct. Something moving outside. It wasn't the wind. I held my breath, straining to hear. A soft crunch, like a footstep in the dirt. Then another, closer. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. The lantern was still burning low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I glanced toward the window. The curtains were thin, but in the dim light, I couldn't see anything outside. For a long moment, I just sat there, waiting, listening, but the sound didn't come again. Just the wind. Maybe it was an animal. A deer, a raccoon, something harmless. I told myself that, but I still felt uneasy. After a while, I lay back down, but it took hours before I finally drifted off. The next morning, I stepped outside and looked around. The ground was covered in a thin layer of frost, the air cold enough to sting my lungs. I walked around the cabin, searching for tracks, but the dirt was too dry to hold anything clear. It was probably nothing. I tried to shake off the unease and spent the day hiking. The mountains were beautiful, the trails winding through dense forest, occasionally opening up to breathtaking views. It was peaceful, and for a while I forgot about the night before. But that peace didn't last. By the time I got back, the sun was already dipping below the trees. The cabin looked different in the fading light, smaller, more isolated. The unease crept back in. I forced myself to ignore it, made dinner, and tried to relax. Then, just like the night before, I woke up in the middle of the night. And just like before, something was outside. This time, it was closer. A slow, deliberate movement. Not just footsteps. Something brushing against the cabin walls. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. The sound circled the cabin, moving from one side to the other. A slow, dragging noise. I grabbed the lantern, its weak glow barely pushing back the darkness. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it an animal? Person? Then something tapped against the window. Not hard, just a light, deliberate tap. I froze. The curtains were closed, but I didn't dare move to open them. My hands were shaking. I listened, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing. Minutes passed. The wind outside kept blowing, but the other sounds were gone. I barely slept after that. I lay there, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside, half expecting to find nothing. But there, in the dirt just outside the window, were tracks. Not animal tracks, boot prints. Someone had been out there. A chill ran through me. I looked around, scanning the tree line, the empty clearing. Whoever had been here was gone now. But for how long? I packed my things quickly, throwing everything into my bag. I didn't care about breakfast. I didn't care about anything except getting the hell out of there. I reached my car, but as I grabbed the door handle, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The back tire was slashed. Not just deflated, cut. A long, deliberate gash straight through the rubber. My hands started shaking. I looked around, my breath coming in short gasps. Whoever had been outside my cabin, they hadn't just been watching. They had been making sure I couldn't leave. I forced myself to think. There was a spare tire in the trunk. I could change it, but that would take time. Time I might not have. I grabbed the tire iron, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. Then I got to work. Every few seconds, I glanced up, scanning the trees, the cabin, the dirt road. The forest was still, empty. I worked fast, faster than I ever had in my life. My hands fumbled. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. Finally, the new tire was on. I didn't even bother packing up the old one. I just threw the tools in the trunk, jumped into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into reverse, kicking up dust as I spun out of the clearing, tires skidding on the dirt road. I didn't stop. Not once. Not until I was miles away, back on the main highway, the safety of civilization finally in reach. Even then, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I never found out who had been out there. I never went back to that cabin. And I never, ever go camping alone anymore. I never wanted to come here alone. I told myself that a dozen times as I drove up the winding mountain road, watching the trees close in around me like the ribs of a giant beast. It was late September, and the leaves were already starting to turn, gold and red flickering in the afternoon light. The cabin was tucked away in the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor, and that was exactly why I had rented it. I needed to get away from everything, the stress, the noise, the people. I wanted quiet, but as I pulled into the gravel driveway and shut off the engine, the silence felt too thick, too heavy. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. The cabin was a simple A-frame, dark wood with a wraparound porch. A place meant for hunting trips and quiet weekends, not for someone like me. A woman alone, looking for space to breathe. But I had paid for the week, and I wasn't going to turn around now. I grabbed my bags, locked the car behind me, and climbed the porch steps. The front door was stiff, the kind that swelled in the humidity, and it took some force to push it open. Inside, everything smelled of old wood and dust. There was a fireplace in the corner, a small kitchen with outdated appliances, and a narrow staircase leading up to the loft where the bed was. I dropped my bags by the couch and exhaled. Alone, just as I wanted. I spent the first few hours unpacking, setting up my laptop on the small dining table. There was no Wi-Fi out here, but I could still write. That was the plan, to finally finish the novel I'd been working on. No distractions, no excuses, just me and my words. By the time the sun started to set, I realized how dark it got out here. There were no streetlights, no distant glow of a town on the horizon, just the endless black of the woods stretching in every direction. I lit a few lamps, checked that the doors were locked, and made myself a simple dinner. The first night was quiet, too quiet. Every little sound felt amplified. The creak of the wood as the cabin settled, the distant hoot of an owl, the wind brushing against the trees. I told myself it was nothing, just nature, just my own nerves. But then I heard something else. Footsteps, soft, slow, just outside the cabin. I froze, listening. My heart pounded against my ribs. The sound was light, deliberate. Not an animal, not the wind. Someone was out there. I crept to the window, careful not to make a sound, and peered out. Darkness. Nothing but the vague outline of the trees and the faint glint of my car reflecting the porch light. I stood there for a long time, barely breathing, waiting for something, anything to move. But there was nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had spent too much time in the city, where every noise meant something, where every stranger was a potential threat. Out here, things were different, safe, but I still made sure the doors were locked. The next morning, I found the footprints. I had barely slept, every little sound keeping me on edge. But when I stepped outside with my coffee, the sight of them made my stomach drop. A trail of footprints in the dirt, circling the cabin. They were fresh, the damp earth still pressed down in the shape of a shoe. Not boots, sneakers. Someone had been here, watching. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around my coffee mug. Maybe it was a hiker who got lost. Maybe it was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. I forced myself to go about my day. I wrote for a few hours, took a short walk down the narrow path behind the cabin, trying to shake the unease. I even convinced myself I was being ridiculous, until night fell again. I locked the doors early, double-checked the windows. I didn't turn on the porch light this time. If someone was out there, I didn't want to give them a better view inside. For a long time, nothing happened. I sat on the couch, trying to focus on my book, trying to pretend everything was fine. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. Soft footsteps, circling the cabin. Slow, measured. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the kitchen counter and crept to the window, heart hammering. The moonlight was faint, but I could just make out the shadow of someone moving near the trees. Tall, thin. They weren't in a hurry. They weren't trying to break in. They were just watching. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stood there, gripping the flashlight so tight my fingers ached. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. I stayed awake until dawn. By the third day, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept. I barely ate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadowy figure standing in the woods. I thought about leaving, but I had no proof that anything had happened. No one had broken in. No one had hurt me. If I called the police, what would I even say? Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut. I wasn't safe here. I decided to leave in the morning. That night, I barricaded the doors with a chair and the heavy coffee table. I kept the flashlight beside me and stayed downstairs, too afraid to sleep in the open loft. At some point, exhaustion took over. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, the room was pitch black. The fire had burned down to embers. The air was too still, too quiet. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, not outside. Breathing, slow, shallow, inside the cabin. My stomach turned to ice. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I could barely see in the dark, but I felt it. Someone standing nearby, watching. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. Then, in one swift motion, I grabbed the flashlight and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. The couch was empty. The kitchen was empty. The front door was still locked. But the back door was open. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't touched that door since I arrived. I would have heard it open, which meant I turned the flashlight toward the stairs. The loft, the narrow wooden steps creaked. Someone was up there. I ran. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the front door, tearing away the barricade. My hands fumbled with the lock, shaking so hard I almost dropped the keys. Behind me, a single slow step creaked on the stairs. I yanked the door open and sprinted to my car. The engine roared to life, my tires kicking up gravel as I sped down the dark road. My hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see who had been in the cabin. I drove straight to the nearest town and checked into a motel, shaking so badly I could barely sign my name at the front desk. The next morning, I called the owner of the cabin and told him what happened. He didn't believe me, said the locks were fine, that no one else had rented the place in months. But when he went to check, he found something I hadn't noticed in my rush to escape. Footprints inside the cabin, leading from the back door to the loft, and the closet door upstairs had been left wide open. I needed a break. Work had been suffocating, and the city felt like a cage. I wasn't the kind of person who went on vacations, but I wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere far from people. A cabin in the woods seemed perfect. I spent a few days browsing through rental listings and finally found one that fit my budget. The pictures showed a simple wooden cabin tucked into a dense forest, with a small porch, a fire pit out front, and a view of a lake in the distance. It looked peaceful. The listing didn't have many reviews, just a few generic comments about a great escape from the city and a nice place to unplug. That didn't bother me. The owner's name was George, just George, no last name. He handled everything through email, which was fine with me. His messages were short and to the point, just the check-in instructions and a note about how there was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, and no landline. I expected that. It was part of why I wanted to go. I drove up on a Thursday afternoon, taking winding back roads through thick forests. The GPS lost signal about an hour before I arrived, but I had saved the directions. The last few miles were on a dirt road, the kind that made my car's suspension groan. The cabin looked just like the pictures, small, weathered, with a stone chimney and a dark green door. There were no other houses in sight, just miles of trees stretching in every direction. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. It was exactly what I had wanted. I stepped onto the porch and noticed a note taped to the door. * welcome. Key is under the flower pot. No fires inside. Enjoy your stay. *. The handwriting was uneven, almost shaky. I wasn't sure if it was from old age or just someone who didn't write much. I found the key where he said it would be and stepped inside. The cabin was simple. A small living room with a couch, a coffee table, and a stone fireplace. A tiny kitchen with a gas stove, a fridge that hummed loudly, and a single bedroom with a bed that looked older than me. There was no TV, no radio, nothing. Just silence. I unpacked, made a quick meal, and sat on the porch as the sun went down. The quiet was almost too much. No cars, no sirens, no distant hum of city life. Just wind through the trees and the occasional creak of the wooden porch beneath me. That first night, I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that only comes when you're far from everything. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat on the porch, watching mist rise from the trees. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt relaxed. Then I noticed something. There were footprints in the dirt near the cabin. Not mine. I had arrived in the evening, and the ground had been undisturbed except for my tire tracks. But now, there were fresh prints leading up to the porch and stopping right at the door. I looked around, but the forest was still and empty. Maybe George had come by, checking in on the place. It wasn't unusual for cabin owners to do that, right? I shook it off, spent the day hiking near the lake, and came back exhausted. That night, as I sat by the fire pit, I heard something in the trees. Not an animal. Breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. I sat completely still, listening. It wasn't close, but it was there, just beyond the firelight. I told myself it was my imagination, the way silence could play tricks on you. But something felt off. I barely slept. The next morning, I found another note on the porch. Asterisk, hope you're settling in. Let me know if you need anything. George asterisk. I hadn't seen or heard anyone approach the cabin. No footsteps on the porch, no knock on the door. I walked around the cabin, looking for more footprints. I found them. Asterisk asterisk leading from the woods to the porch, but none leading away asterisk asterisk. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe he had walked backwards. Maybe I just didn't see the return tracks. Still, I felt uneasy. That afternoon, I decided to drive into town, just to be around people for a little while. But when I got to my car, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The back tire was slashed. Clean cut, deep. No way it was an accident. I felt a rush of panic. I was stranded. No cell service. No way to call for help. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the ruined tire. The forest felt different now. Not peaceful, not quiet, just watching. I forced myself to calm down. I had a spare in the trunk. I could change the tire, drive into town, get a new one. As I lifted the trunk, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned fast, but no one was there. Just trees. I changed the tire as fast as I could, my hands shaking the entire time. By the time I got to town, it was late afternoon. The mechanic at the small gas station looked at the tire and frowned. "Clean cut," he muttered, like someone did it on purpose. I didn't say anything. I had planned to stay at the cabin for a full week, but I had a bad feeling now. A really bad feeling. I bought a new tire, grabbed some food, and drove back before it got dark. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, pack up and go. That night, I locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle just in case. I kept a kitchen knife next to the bed. At some point, I fell asleep. I woke up to a creak, not from inside the cabin. The porch. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then, through the tiny bedroom window, I saw movement. A shadow. Someone standing just outside the cabin, unmoving. I gripped the knife so tightly my hand hurt. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, the shadow moved. I heard the soft crunch of footsteps retreating into the woods. I didn't sleep after that. I waited until first light, threw my things into my bag, and left. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw something nailed to a tree at the edge of the forest. A dead rabbit, its body split open, its insides spilling down the bark. I didn't stop driving until I was hours away. I never contacted George. He never contacted me. A few months later, I tried to find the listing again. It was gone. The cabin didn't show up on any rental sites. It was like it had never existed. Sometimes I think about the footprints, the slashed tire, the shadow outside my window. I tell myself it was just a bad experience, a creepy coincidence. But I know what I felt that night. Someone was out there, and they didn't want me to leave. I never liked staying at my uncle's hunting cabin. It wasn't fear exactly, just an unease I couldn't shake. The place was old, isolated, and sat deep in the woods of northern Arizona, miles from the nearest road. The only way in was a dirt trail that wound through the pines, rough enough to rattle your teeth if you took it too fast. My uncle swore by the place, said it was perfect for hunting trips, peaceful, away from the noise of town. I had been there a few times as a kid, but this was my first time going alone. My uncle asked me to check on the cabin while he was out of state. It was a simple request: drive up, make sure no one had broken in, and spend the night so the place didn't sit empty too long. He left a rifle behind just in case. I left town late, later than I should have. The sun was already dipping below the trees when I turned onto the dirt road. The truck's tires crunched over dry pine needles and loose gravel, the sound strangely loud in the quiet. No cell service out here, no houses, no streetlights, just trees stretching for miles in every direction. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, the last light was fading. It was a small, single-story structure with a slanted tin roof and a covered porch. The walls were dark wood, weathered by years of sun and storms. A woodshed sat a few yards away, and behind the cabin, the forest stretched on forever. I grabbed my bag and the rifle and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old wood and dust. I went through the routine, checked the doors and windows, made sure nothing had been disturbed. Everything was as it should be. The wind had picked up outside, rustling the trees, making the old cabin creak. I shook it off, lit the lantern, and got a fire going in the wood stove. The place warmed up fast. The only sound was the crackling fire and the occasional groan of the wind against the walls. I should have felt safe, but something wasn't right. After a quick meal, I stepped onto the porch to get some fresh air. The night was cold, the sky clear, full of stars. The wind had died down, leaving the forest unsettlingly still. Then I heard something, a single sharp crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. Not close, but not far either. I froze, listening. Nothing. Probably just an animal. Deer, maybe. But the way it sounded, deliberate and heavy, made me uneasy. I stayed outside a little longer, watching the trees, before heading back in and locking the door. I didn't sleep well. The bed was stiff, the blankets scratchy. The fire had burned low, and the darkness in the room felt heavier than it should have. Every little noise outside made my skin crawl. The faint rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Then, in the middle of the night, something scraped against the wall outside. I sat up fast, my heart pounding. It was slow, deliberate, a dragging sound, right along the wood. I grabbed the rifle and crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. I peered outside, but in the darkness, I couldn't see anything. The trees stood motionless. The woodshed was just a black shape against the night. Nothing moved. I waited, listening. The scrape came again, from the other side of the cabin now. It wasn't the wind. Something was out there. I stayed by the window, barely breathing. My grip on the rifle was so tight my fingers ached. Then, from the tree line, I saw it. A shape standing just at the edge of the woods. It was tall, taller than any person should be. Thin. The way it stood was wrong. Its limbs too long, its posture unnatural. And the worst part? It was watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt it staring. The fire in the wood stove crackled, and in that brief flash of light, the thing moved. Not like a man, not like an animal. It shifted too fast, too fluid, disappearing into the trees without a sound. I wanted to believe my eyes were playing tricks on me, that the darkness was making shapes where there were none. But the fear was real. My gut told me to leave, but I didn't. I should have. Instead, I locked the door, stoked the fire, and sat with my back to the wall, rifle in my lap, waiting for morning. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, not in the woods, on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the wooden boards. I held my breath. The rifle was still in my hands, my finger already on the trigger. The steps stopped right outside the door. Silence. Then ***, 3 sharp knocks. ***. I almost fired right through the door. My hands were slick with sweat. Then, a voice. My voice. Muffled. Wrong. Let me in. I nearly dropped the rifle. The voice was mine, but not. It was off like a recording played back at the wrong speed. Let me in. I didn't move. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Then the footsteps started again, moving away this time, slow and deliberate, back across the porch, down the steps. Then nothing, just silence. I didn't sleep again. I waited, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the door until the first light of dawn broke through the trees. Only then did I move. I stepped outside, rifle raised, scanning the clearing. The air was crisp, the morning silent. Nothing seemed out of place. But then I saw them, footprints, deep in the dirt leading up to the porch. But they weren't normal tracks. They started as human prints, barefoot, but halfway across the yard, they changed, the toes elongating, the arch shifting, becoming something else. Something that wasn't human. I didn't stay to investigate. I grabbed my bag, got in the truck, and drove. Fast ***. Down that dirt road, not stopping until I hit pavement. I told my uncle I checked the cabin. I didn't tell him what happened. I never went back, and I never will. I first saw the listing for the cabin while looking for a cheap weekend rental online. The pictures weren't anything special, just an old log cabin in the woods, surrounded by thick trees, a small clearing, and a narrow dirt road leading up to it. It wasn't particularly nice, but it was affordable. I needed a break from the city, and I didn't care much about luxury. The listing said it had a working fireplace, a stocked kitchen, and a small creek nearby for fishing. That was all I needed. I booked it for 3 nights. The check-in instructions were simple: no front desk, no keys to pick up, just a code for the door lock, which I'd get in an email the morning of my stay. Seemed easy enough. The drive up took longer than expected. The paved roads turned to gravel, then to dirt, winding through dense trees with no signs or markers. My GPS lost signal an hour before I arrived, so I had to rely on a set of written directions from the host. It was already late afternoon by the time I reached the cabin. The place looked about the same as in the pictures. A little smaller, maybe. The logs were old, darkened by time and weather. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. The front porch had a wooden bench and a stack of firewood. A single security camera was mounted on the corner of the cabin, pointed at the driveway. That was normal. A lot of rentals had cameras outside for security. I grabbed my bag and stepped inside. The inside was simple: one main room with a kitchen area, a table, and a couch facing a small TV. A short hallway led to a single bedroom and a bathroom. The furniture was old but clean. There was a fireplace with a pile of logs beside it, ready to use. A single window in the main room looked out at the trees. The first thing I noticed was a small blinking light in the corner near the ceiling. Camera. It wasn't mentioned in the listing. I didn't like it, but I'd seen enough rentals with indoor cameras before. They were usually there to prevent theft, even if it felt like an invasion of privacy. The light meant it was on, though, which bothered me. I made a mental note to contact the host about it later. I dropped my bags in the bedroom and checked my phone. No signal. No Wi-Fi either. That was expected, but it still made me uneasy. I was completely cut off from everything out here. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the area. There wasn't much, just thick trees in every direction. The creek was a short walk away, barely more than a trickle of water over some rocks. The sun started setting around 6, and the temperature dropped fast. I went back inside to start a fire. That's when I noticed the second camera. It was in the hallway, positioned near the ceiling, pointing directly at the bedroom door. That wasn't normal. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the little blinking red light. I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe I'd walked right past it. I checked the bathroom. No cameras there. Then I checked the bedroom. Nothing. Only the 2 cameras, the one in the main room and the one in the hallway. Still, it didn't sit right with me. I went back to the living room and stared at the first camera. The little red light blinked steadily. Recording. I grabbed a chair, stood up, and reached for it. As soon as my fingers touched the plastic casing, the red light turned off. I froze. The camera was still there, but the light was gone. It wasn't blinking anymore. I waited, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing. I checked the hallway camera. The light on that one was off too. I hadn't turned them off. I stepped back, my skin crawling. Maybe they were motion activated. Maybe they shut off when they detected movement nearby. But that didn't make sense. I needed to get out of that cabin. I grabbed my bag from the bedroom and slung it over my shoulder, moving fast. As I reached for the door handle, something flickered in the corner of my eye. The light was back, both cameras, blinking again. I threw open the door and stepped outside into the freezing air. The trees were silent. The sky had darkened completely. My car sat alone in the dirt driveway, headlights reflecting off the security camera mounted on the cabin's corner. The little red light on that camera was blinking too. I was being watched. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I had no signal, no way to call for help. The nearest town was miles away, and I didn't even know if I could find my way back in the dark. I decided to sleep in the car. I locked the doors, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and tried to get comfortable. The air was freezing, and the cold crept in fast. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up suddenly. Something wasn't right. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. My breath fogged up the windshield. Then I saw it. The front door of the cabin was open, just a few inches. I knew I had closed it. The security camera on the cabin's corner was still blinking. Watching, I stared at the open door for what felt like hours. The dark space beyond it was completely still. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Then, so slowly I almost didn't notice, the door began to close. Not slamming shut, not blowing in the wind. Closing, gently, deliberately. I started my car and threw it into reverse, tires kicking up dirt as I backed down the narrow driveway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the wheel. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main road, miles away. I found a gas station with Wi-Fi and messaged the host. I kept it simple. There are cameras inside the cabin. That wasn't in the listing. Also, the door opened on its own in the middle of the night. I left early. I'd like a refund. Asterisk asterisk. I didn't expect a response right away. It was late, but a few minutes later, my phone vibrated. A message. There shouldn't be any cameras inside. The only one is outside by the driveway. Asterisk asterisk. I stared at the screen. Another message came through. Also, I checked the security footage. You never closed the door when you left. It was open all night. Asterisk asterisk. I felt sick. I knew I had closed it. I never went back. Never pushed for the refund. A few weeks later, the listing was removed. The cabin was gone from the site. I don't know who was watching me that night, but I know they were inside. It was supposed to be a quiet week. That's why I went up there. The cabin was an old family property, sitting deep in the woods, about a 2-hour drive from any town. My uncle had built it decades ago, and over time it had been passed around between relatives who barely used it. By the time it reached me, it was more or less forgotten. No phone service, no internet, no neighbors. Just trees, a small lake, and silence. That was what I wanted. I had been dealing with a lot, work, personal stress, all of it. I needed a break from people, from noise, from everything. A week alone, just reading, hiking, and sitting by the lake. The drive up was long but easy. The gravel road that led to the cabin had been overgrown a bit, but my truck made it through fine. The place was exactly as I remembered. Small, plain, weathered. Just a wooden cabin with a tin roof, a porch that sagged a little in the middle, and a fire pit out front. The lake was just a short walk down a narrow path, the trees thick and dark around it. I unpacked, set up my things, and got comfortable. The first day was peaceful. I sat on the porch, drank some coffee, and watched the wind move through the trees. The air smelled clean, the way it does when you're deep in the woods, far from anything. That night, I built a fire, made some simple food, and listened to the sounds of the forest. It wasn't until the second day that I saw the dog. It showed up in the morning. I had been out by the lake, walking along the shore, when I spotted something moving through the trees. At first, I thought it was a coyote, thin, low to the ground, moving strangely. But as it got closer, I saw it was a dog, a big one. It had long legs and patchy fur, a dull grayish-brown color. It was thin, too thin, its ribs pressing against its skin. Its head hung low, ears slightly back, and its tail was missing, just a stub where it should have been. I stopped walking. The dog stopped too. We stared at each other for a moment. There was something wrong with it. It wasn't just thin. It looked off like it had been put together wrong. Its legs were too long, its body too narrow, and its eyes were strange. Not the bright, alert eyes you expect from a dog, but dull and unfocused, like it was looking through me instead of at me. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked back into the woods. I watched it go, feeling uneasy. I had seen stray dogs before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just lost or hungry, it didn't belong. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Just a stray, maybe sick, maybe abandoned. I went back to the cabin, made breakfast, and tried to forget about it. But that night, I heard it again. I had been sitting inside, reading by lantern light, when I heard something move outside. Slow, deliberate steps on dry leaves. Not heavy enough to be a person, but not light enough to be a small animal. I turned off the lantern and moved to the window. The moon was bright enough to see by, and as my eyes adjusted, I spotted it. The dog was standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the fire pit. It was watching the cabin. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, its head low, eyes barely visible in the dark. I don't know how long I watched it. A minute? 5? Eventually, it turned and disappeared into the trees. I felt unsettled but told myself again that it was just a stray. Maybe it had been fed by people before and was hanging around hoping for food. I made sure the doors were locked and went to bed. The next day, I found tracks near the cabin. Large, deep prints in the dirt, circling the porch. And something else. Claw marks. They were on the cabin door. Shallow scratches, like the dog had pressed its paws against it, testing it. That was when I decided to leave. I packed my things, loaded up the truck, and got ready to go. But when I turned the key, the engine wouldn't start. I tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. I checked my phone, no signal. Panic started to creep in. I had food and water, but the idea of being stranded didn't sit well with me. Still, I had no choice but to wait. I spent the day trying to keep busy, hoping another car might come down the road. No one did. That night, I built a big fire, hoping it would keep the dog away. I sat on the porch with my flashlight and my hunting knife, listening. Sometime after midnight, I heard it again. Slow, steady footsteps, closer this time. The fire had burned down low, just glowing embers. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it toward the trees. The dog was standing just beyond the light, but it wasn't alone. There were two of them now. The second one was smaller, but just as thin, just as wrong. They stood side by side, staring at me. Then, at the same time, they took a step forward. I felt my heart hammering. I gripped the knife tighter. Another step, then another. They were moving toward the cabin, slow but steady, their heads low, bodies tense. I stood up, trying to make myself look bigger. I shouted, waved my arms. They didn't stop. I grabbed a burning log from the fire and threw it. It landed just in front of them, sending up a burst of sparks. That made them stop. For a long moment, they just stood there, staring. Then, without a sound, they turned and slipped back into the trees. I didn't sleep that night. The first light, I grabbed my gear and started walking. It was a long way to town, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I walked for hours, constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see them following me. Eventually, I reached a road. A passing truck picked me up, and I got a ride back to town. When I returned with a tow truck the next day, the cabin felt different. The firewood I had stacked was scattered. The door had more claw marks, and in the dirt by the porch, I found fresh tracks. Not just 2 this time, 4, maybe 5. I never went back. The cabin still belongs to my family, but as far as I know, no one has used it in years. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through back roads or walking alone, I get the feeling that something is watching. Something thin, something quiet, something that doesn't belong. I don't know why I agreed to stay out there alone. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe I just didn't realize how quickly loneliness can turn into something worse. The cabin belonged to a friend of my uncle's, an old hunting lodge in a valley deep in the forest. It was a solid structure, built decades ago, with thick wooden walls, a slanted tin roof, and a covered porch facing the creek. No insulation, no running water, and only a wood stove for heat. There was an outhouse about 50 yards away, hidden behind some overgrown pines. A single dirt road led in and out, twisting through the trees, barely wide enough for my truck. I had planned to stay for a week. My uncle's friend needed someone to check on the place, make sure no animals had torn through it, patch up anything broken, and keep an eye out for trespassers. He and my uncle used to hunt there in the winters, but they hadn't been up in years. He said I could use whatever I wanted: firewood, food in the pantry, even his old rifle if I needed it. I drove up on a Monday afternoon. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the trees as I pulled my truck into the clearing. The cabin stood just ahead, past a stretch of tall grass that swayed in the breeze. It looked solid, but time had worn it down. Faded wood, a few missing shingles, and a front door that sagged slightly on its hinges. I unlocked it and stepped inside. Dust floated in the air. The main room was simple. A wooden table with a few chairs, a couch pushed against the far wall, and the wood stove near the center. A doorway led to a small bedroom in the back, just big enough for a cot and a nightstand. A single window faced the creek. I set my bag down, took a deep breath, and got to work. The first 2 days were fine. The air was cool, the leaves were just starting to turn, and the sound of the creek behind the cabin was peaceful. I spent my time chopping wood, clearing out some fallen branches around the property, and patching up a small hole near the roof where squirrels had been nesting. At night, I kept a fire going in the stove. The cabin creaked with the wind, but nothing unusual. The silence out there was thick. No traffic, no distant hum of civilization. Just the crackling of the fire, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was on the third night that things started to feel different. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind pushing through the trees, but then I heard it again. Something moving near the creek. A steady crunching sound, like footsteps in the dry leaves. I sat up in bed, listening. The sound moved closer. Slow, deliberate steps. I held my breath. Could have been a deer or a coyote, maybe even a bear, but something about it felt wrong. It wasn't the random rustling of an animal wandering through. It was steady, careful, like something was circling the cabin. I reached for the rifle by the bed and waited. The steps continued for a while, moving around the side of the cabin, then back toward the trees. Then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I had convinced myself it was just an animal. Maybe a stray dog, maybe a curious deer. I went outside, circling the cabin, looking for tracks. The ground was mostly dry, but I found a few disturbances in the leaves. Small patches of dirt where something had stepped. The problem was the tracks didn't lead anywhere. They circled the cabin once, then stopped near the edge of the trees. No trail leading in, no trail leading out. I shook it off and went about my day, but the unease stayed with me. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I forced myself to relax. I cooked some canned soup on the wood stove, read a few pages from an old book I found on the shelf, and tried to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. But when I stepped outside to use the outhouse, I noticed something. The woods felt off. I can't explain it. The trees were still, the air was dead quiet, and even the creek seemed muted. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just silence. I hurried back inside and locked the door. That night, it happened again. I woke up to the same sound, slow, steady footsteps. This time, they were closer. I gripped the rifle and sat up, heart pounding. The sound moved toward the porch. The old wooden steps creaked under the weight of something heavy. Then a long pause. The door had no lock, just a simple latch. I held my breath, waiting, expecting to see the knob turn. But it didn't. Instead, I heard a sound that sent ice through my veins. A deep, deliberate exhale. It was just on the other side of the door. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, gripping the rifle with both hands. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Eventually, the steps moved away. I barely slept after that. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed my things, loaded up my truck, and took one last look at the cabin. As I walked toward the driver's side door, I glanced toward the porch. The dust on the wooden boards had been disturbed. A single barefoot print. I didn't think. I just got in the truck, started it up, and drove. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, miles away from that place. I called my uncle as soon as I had service, told him I was done, told him what I had heard. He didn't say much, just listened. Then, after a long pause, he muttered something I'll never forget. That's why I never liked that place. I don't know who or what was out there that night, but I know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. I don't know why I agreed to go in the first place. Maybe I thought a weekend in the mountains would be peaceful, a good way to clear my head. Maybe I let myself believe the others when they said it would be fun. Either way, I was wrong. It started with a long drive, 5 hours into the mountains, winding up roads that barely had guardrails, watching the trees get taller and the air grow thinner. By the time we reached the cabin, it was nearly dark. The others were excited, talking about hiking trails and fishing spots, but I was just glad to be out of the car. The cabin was old, made of heavy logs stacked together, the kind of place that looked like it had been there for decades. There was a wide porch with a railing that overlooked the trees, and inside, it smelled like dust and old wood. The first night was uneventful. The wind howled outside, shaking the trees, and the cold crept through the cracks in the walls. I had trouble sleeping, but that was nothing new. I lay awake listening to the wind, hearing the branches scratch against the roof, telling myself there was nothing out there. By morning, the others were already planning a hike. I wasn't in the mood for it. Something about the place unsettled me, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was how quiet everything was, the way the trees swallowed sound. I told them I'd stay behind, maybe chop some wood for the fire, read a book. They left mid-morning, promising to be back before dark. I watched them disappear down the trail, their voices fading into the trees. I spent the next few hours trying to keep busy. I stacked firewood, checked the water pump, made sure everything in the cabin was in working order. It was an old place, but solid, the kind of structure built to last. Still, I didn't like how alone I felt. The nearest town was miles away, and even with a car, the roads were steep and winding. By mid-afternoon, the clouds started rolling in. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and I had a feeling the others were going to get caught in a storm. I went inside, started the fire, and waited. An hour passed, then another. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor. I checked my phone, no service. That wasn't a surprise. I was standing near the window when I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. The front door was open. I knew I had shut it. I was sure of it. I walked over, looking outside. The porch was empty, the trees swaying in the wind. No footprints in the dirt, no signs of anyone nearby. Just the open door, swinging slightly on its hinges. I closed it, locking the deadbolt. Another hour passed. It was getting dark now, and the others still weren't back. I checked the time, 7:12 p.m. Too late for a simple day hike. They should have returned by now. The wind was louder outside, and I could hear branches cracking in the distance. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the cabin. I froze, listening. The floorboards creaked slightly as I moved toward the window. I couldn't see anything, just darkness beyond the trees. I reached for the flashlight, turning it on and shining it outside. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the edge of the trees. Nothing. I waited, heart pounding. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw movement, a figure half hidden behind a tree. I couldn't make out details, just a shape, a person standing completely still. I stayed frozen, watching. The figure didn't move. They were just standing there, partially obscured, like they were watching the cabin. I turned off the flashlight. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I thought it was safer not to let them see me. I stood in the dark, my back pressed against the wall, listening to my own breathing. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time. I didn't hesitate. I locked every door, every window. The front door, the back door, the side windows. I double-checked everything, making sure nothing was open. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows against the walls. I waited. Minutes passed. Then I heard it. A knock. Just one. Not at the front door. Not at the back. At the window. I didn't move. The knock came again. Slow. Deliberate. I had no weapon, nothing to defend myself with. My heart was hammering in my chest. I could hear the wind outside, but nothing else. No footsteps, no rustling. Just the fire crackling and my own breathing. Then I heard the door handle jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the fireplace poker, holding it tight. The door rattled again. Then silence. I waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. I stayed awake all night, listening, staring at the door. By morning, I finally gathered the courage to check outside. The ground was wet from the storm. There were footprints, deep ones, circling the cabin. They led to the back of the house, to the woods, disappearing into the trees. But there was something else. Near the front door, in the mud, were more prints. Smaller ones, like someone had been crouching there, waiting. I locked the door behind me and waited for the others to return. They arrived just after noon, soaked and exhausted, saying they had gotten lost when the storm hit. They hadn't seen anyone. I didn't tell them what happened. I just wanted to leave. By the time we packed up and drove away, I could still feel it, that sense of being watched. And as we pulled onto the road, I looked back one last time. There, standing just at the edge of the trees, was a figure. Still, watching. I didn't say a word. I just kept driving. I should have never gone on that trip. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, just me alone in a rented cabin for a few days. I had been feeling burned out, drained from work, and I thought isolating myself deep in the woods would give me some peace. The cabin listing had promised solitude, fresh air, and a break from the world. And it had delivered, just not in the way I wanted. It started out normal enough. I drove up on a Thursday morning, following the directions the owner had sent me. The road twisted through miles of dense forest, growing narrower and rougher the farther I went. Eventually, it turned into nothing more than a dirt path, barely wide enough for my car. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches clawing at the roof. I had to drive slow, weaving around deep potholes and rocks. After what felt like forever, I reached a small clearing. The cabin sat in the middle, a simple wooden structure with a slanted metal roof. It looked old but solid. A small front porch sagged under its own weight, and a stack of firewood was piled up beside the door. The forest surrounded the place like a wall, thick, dark, and endless. I got out and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back from the long drive. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. Everything was still, almost unnaturally quiet. No wind, no birds, just silence. I grabbed my bags and went inside. The cabin was basic. One main room with a kitchen, a tiny bathroom, and a bedroom tucked in the back. A fireplace sat against one wall, stocked with enough wood to last a week. There was no TV, no internet, and only a few dim lamps for light. It was exactly what I had wanted. For the first few hours, everything felt fine. I unpacked, made some food, and sat on the porch with a book. The quiet was nice at first, peaceful, but as the sun dipped lower, that feeling started to change. By the time dusk settled in, I noticed something strange. The forest, which had been silent all day, was still silent. Normally, at this time of evening, I would have expected to hear something, crickets, frogs, maybe the distant call of an owl. But there was nothing, just the same heavy silence as before. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just my imagination. I built a fire in the cabin's old fireplace, the crackling flames filling the space with warmth. I sat in the worn-out armchair near the fire and read until my eyes grew heavy. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up suddenly, for no clear reason. The fire had burned low, casting faint shadows on the walls. It was pitch black outside. Something felt off. I sat still, listening. The silence pressed in around me, heavier than before. My skin prickled with unease. I glanced toward the windows. They were just dark rectangles, reflecting the dim glow of the fire. Then I heard it. A single noise, faint but clear. A shuffle of movement. Outside. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It had come from somewhere near the porch. A soft, deliberate step. Not an animal too heavy. It sounded like a person. I waited, straining to hear more. Nothing. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe it was the cabin settling. Maybe I had imagined it. But then it came again. Another step. Closer this time. I swallowed hard. My car was parked outside, but the keys were on the kitchen counter. If I ran for it, I'd have to make it across the porch, into the dark. I didn't move. I just sat there, every muscle locked in place. Minutes passed, maybe longer. I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a falling branch. Maybe my mind playing tricks on me. I forced myself to get up and check the door. It was locked. I peeked through the window, but all I could see was my own reflection. The night beyond was a black void. I told myself I was being paranoid. I went to the bedroom, locked that door too, and got into bed. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay there, listening to the silence, waiting for another sound. At some point, exhaustion won. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I felt foolish. The fear from the night before seemed ridiculous in the light of day. I got up, made coffee, and stepped onto the porch. And then I saw them. Footprints. Clear, fresh footprints in the dirt. They led from the trees, stopping just short of the porch steps, right where I had heard the sound. I stared at them, my stomach twisting into knots. They weren't boot prints, just bare feet. Large, human. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing there. Just the same endless stretch of woods. I thought about leaving. I could pack up, drive away, forget the whole thing. But I told myself it was probably just a local, some hunter or hiker passing through. Maybe they saw the cabin and got curious. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. The rest of the day passed slowly. I went on a short hike, trying to distract myself. I followed a narrow trail behind the cabin, winding deeper into the woods. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. I turned back sooner than I had planned. That night, I locked up early, double-checking every door and window. I kept the fire going, its light making the cabin feel a little less empty. Hours passed. I started to relax. Then, just as I was beginning to drift off, something tapped against the window. A soft, deliberate tap. I shot upright, my heart slamming against my ribs. My eyes darted to the window. Nothing, just darkness. Then another tap. Slow, patient. I didn't move. I barely breathed. And then, through the dim firelight, I saw it. A shape outside the window. Not fully visible, just a pale sliver of something pressed against the glass. A hand. Fingers long and thin, resting against the window pane. For a second, I couldn't move. Then instinct kicked in. I bolted for my keys, grabbed them, and yanked the door open. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking too hard to work the lock. My breath came in short gasps, my body screaming at me to move. Behind me, I heard slow, steady footsteps crunching through the dirt. I got the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. For a split second, I dared to look up. A figure stood at the edge of the porch, just beyond the reach of the headlights. Tall, barefoot, watching. I turned the key so hard I thought it would snap. The engine roared to life and I floored it. The cabin vanished in the rearview mirror. The trees blurred past as I sped down the dirt road. not caring about the potholes, not stopping until I was miles away. I didn't go back for my things. I didn't even call the owner. I just left. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without seeing that hand pressed against the glass, without hearing the slow, patient tapping. I don't know who or what was out there, but I do know one thing. I wasn't alone in those woods. I don't go into the woods anymore. Not alone. Not even for a weekend trip. Before that night, I thought I knew the forest, thought I understood it. I spent years hiking, camping, fishing, even staying in remote cabins by myself. But something changed that. Something I can't quite explain. It happened in the fall, during one of those trips I used to take to clear my head. I had found an old cabin rental deep in the woods of northern Michigan. The kind of place with no electricity, no cell service, and barely any roads leading to it. That's exactly what I wanted. Time away from everything. Just me, the trees, and the silence. The drive out, there was long, mostly dirt roads winding through thick forest. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already dipping behind the trees, turning the sky a dull orange. The place looked exactly as advertised. Old but sturdy, with a single room, a wood stove, and a cot in the corner. No running water, just a rain barrel outside. The nearest town was about 20 miles away, and there was nothing but trees in every direction. I unpacked quickly, stacking my food on the wooden shelves and setting up my sleeping bag on the cot. The cabin smelled like old wood and damp earth. A few mice had left droppings in the corners, but nothing unusual for a place like this. I swept them up, lit a lantern, and settled in for the night. That first night was uneventful. The forest was alive with its usual sounds: crickets, owls, the occasional rustling of something in the underbrush. I lay on the cot, listening to the wind against the cabin walls, and eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke early and decided to explore the area. I hiked down to a small creek about a mile from the cabin, filled my water bottle, and spent the afternoon following deer trails through the woods. It was peaceful. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves under my boots and the distant calls of birds. I lost track of time, and by the time I made it back to the cabin, the sun was already low again. As I approached, something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but there was a tightness in my chest, a strange feeling in my gut. The cabin door was slightly open. I knew I had shut it. I was sure of it. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The latch wasn't broken, just unhooked. I pushed the door open slowly, lantern in hand. Inside, everything looked the same. My sleeping bag on the cot, my food on the shelves. But the air felt wrong, stale, almost like someone had been there, standing in the room, breathing. I checked my bag, my supplies, nothing was missing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been disturbed. Something small. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I didn't feel alone anymore. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every noise outside made me sit up, straining to listen. The wind had picked up, and tree branches scraped against the cabin walls, making a soft, rhythmic sound. But underneath it, I thought I heard something else. Something lighter. Footsteps. Not constant, not loud. Just the occasional soft crunch of leaves. Moving. Stopping. Moving again. I held my breath, listening, my fingers gripping the edge of my sleeping bag. I wanted to tell myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, but it didn't sound like that. Deer move quickly, unpredictably. This was slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I sat up, heart hammering. My lantern cast long shadows against the wooden walls, flickering with every slight movement. Then silence. For a long time, I just sat there, waiting. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Eventually, I convinced myself I had imagined it, that it was nothing, that the forest was playing tricks on me. But then, just as I started to relax, tap, just a single, soft tap on the window. I froze. My blood went cold. The window was small, just a single pane of glass with no curtain, set into the wall a few feet from where I slept. I didn't want to turn my head, didn't want to see, but I had to. Slowly, I shifted my eyes toward the glass. The lantern's light reflected off it, making it hard to see outside. Just darkness, trees, nothing else. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe a tree branch had knocked against the cabin. Maybe a pine cone had fallen. It had to be something like that. But then it came again. Asterisk tap. Tap. Asterisk. Lighter this time. More precise. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to run. There was no one out here. No one should be out here. I stayed like that for what felt like forever, staring at the window, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't sleep. Not really. Every sound outside made my muscles tighten. Every gust of wind made me jump. When morning came, I felt like I hadn't rested at all. But the window was just a window. The cabin was just a cabin. Maybe I was losing my mind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stepped outside, scanning the ground around the cabin. The leaves and dirt were undisturbed. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been near the window. I walked around the cabin twice, then again, looking for anything out of place. Nothing. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. I decided to stay one more night. Big mistake. That evening, I built a fire outside, trying to shake off the fear. The flames crackled, the warmth soaking into my skin as I sat on an old log, eating a can of beans straight from the tin. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No crickets. No wind. Just an unnatural stillness pressing in from all sides. Then, just past the tree line, something moved. A shape. It was quick, barely there, slipping between the trees. I shot to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs. My first thought was an animal, maybe a coyote, but deep down I knew better. It was standing, watching. The fire flickered, casting long shadows. I squinted, trying to see, but whatever it was gone. That was it for me. I wasn't staying another second. I packed my bag in record time, throwing everything inside without caring about the mess. I grabbed my lantern, my knife, and bolted for the trail. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just walked as fast as I could, then ran when I was far enough from the cabin. I made it back to my truck, threw my gear in the back, and sped down that dirt road without a single glance behind me. I don't know what I saw. I don't know who or what was out there, but I do know one thing. That cabin wasn't empty, and I was never alone. The moment I stepped out of my truck, I felt it. The air was different here, heavy, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, just empty. The cabin stood at the edge of a thick pine forest, the trees rising like dark walls around it. The nearest town was an hour's drive away, and the last stretch of the road had been nothing but dirt and potholes. I'd come out here alone, looking for a quiet weekend away from everything. Work, noise, people. Just me, the woods, and this old cabin I'd rented online. It looked sturdy enough, though time had worn it down. The logs were darkened with age, the windows smudged and dull. The porch creaked as I stepped onto it, the sound sharp in the silence. I unlocked the door and pushed it open, half expecting a musty rush of air, but it was surprisingly clean inside. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen tucked into the corner, a narrow hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. Basic, but that was fine. I wasn't here for luxury. I set my bag down and checked my phone. No service. I'd expected that. There was a landline on the wall, old and yellowed, but it didn't have a dial tone. No internet, either. Just complete disconnection. That was the point, wasn't it? Outside, the trees swayed slightly, the wind making a low, rushing sound through the needles. The sun was already dipping low, and I figured I should get a fire going before it got too cold. The cabin had electricity, but it felt wrong not to use the fireplace. I stacked some logs inside, grabbed a box of matches from the mantel, and soon had a fire crackling. The flickering light made the cabin feel warmer, more alive. By the time I finished unpacking my things, it was fully dark outside. The forest beyond the windows was just a black void. I turned on a few lamps, their yellow glow barely reaching the corners of the room. The wind had picked up, tapping loose branches against the roof. I made a quick dinner, ate in silence, and sat by the fire for a while, just watching the flames shift and pop. There was something strange about being this alone. No cars passing by, no hum of distant traffic, no voices, no music, nothing. Just the fire, the wind, and the occasional creak of the old wood settling. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easily. The mattress was stiff, and every little noise seemed amplified in the silence. The wind outside hadn't stopped, and I kept hearing something else. A faint rustling, like footsteps moving through dry leaves. At some point, exhaustion won out. I woke up suddenly. No reason, just that sharp, instinctive feeling that something wasn't right. The fire had burned down to embers, the room lit only by the pale glow of the moon filtering through the window. My breath felt too loud in the quiet. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate creak from the porch. I froze. It wasn't the wind. The wind made the trees sway, made the branches scratch, but this was different. This was weight shifting on wooden planks. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, ears straining. Another creak, closer this time. Someone or something was out there. I didn't move, just listened. The sound stopped. A long, tense silence followed. Then, finally, I forced myself to sit up. The room felt colder than before. I reached for the flashlight I'd left by the bed and clicked it on, the weak beam sweeping across the small room. Everything looked the same. I got up, moving as quietly as possible, and went to the front door. The porch light wasn't on. I hadn't turned it on earlier. My hand hovered over the lock, hesitating. Then I heard something that sent a sharp chill through me. A slow, deliberate breath, just beyond the door. I didn't open it. I backed away, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to stay silent. The breathing continued for a few seconds longer, then faded. Footsteps moved off the porch, crunching through the leaves. Slow, unhurried, like whoever it was knew I was awake. I stood there, gripping the flashlight, until the silence swallowed the last sound. I barely slept after that. Morning came with weak gray light seeping through the trees. I stepped onto the porch, half expecting to see something left behind. Footprints, maybe, a sign that I hadn't just imagined it in that half-dream state. There were tracks, boot prints, leading from the trees to the cabin, then back again. I stared at them for a long time, my mind working through every possible explanation. A hiker? A hunter? But why walk up to a locked cabin in the middle of the night? Why stand there, breathing at the door? I didn't have an answer. I told myself it was a one-time thing. Some lost traveler, realizing their mistake and leaving. That was reasonable. That made sense. I stayed. The second night was worse. I forced myself to ignore the feeling of being watched all day. Went on a hike, made a fire, tried to enjoy the isolation. By evening, I almost convinced myself it was fine. Then night came. I double-checked the locks, kept the fire going. But it didn't matter. The moment the darkness settled in, so did the feeling. I was being watched. At some point, I dozed off in the chair by the fire. I don't know what woke me. Maybe instinct. Maybe the sound. I opened my eyes, and someone was standing at the window. Just a shape in the dark, barely visible in the weak glow of the firelight. Tall, motionless. I didn't breathe, didn't move. My mind screamed at me to react, to run, but I just sat there, frozen. Then they moved. Not away, around. Slow footsteps scraping against the porch, moving toward the door. I shot up, grabbed the flashlight, and aimed it at the window. By the time the beam hit the glass, the figure was gone. I heard the door handle rattle. That snapped me into action. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy fireplace poker, and backed away, heart hammering. Silence. Then, footsteps again. Not leaving, circling. I stood there for what felt like hours, gripping the poker until my fingers ached. Then, finally, the steps faded into the woods. I left at first light. I didn't even pack everything. Just grabbed my bag, threw it in the truck, and drove. My hands were shaking on the wheel the whole way down that dirt road. I didn't stop, didn't look back. The rental company called me later, asking why I'd left early. I didn't explain, just said something came up. I don't know who or what was out there, but I know one thing. That cabin wasn't empty. Not really. I never planned on spending the winter alone in the mountains. It started as a simple trip. I'd been working non-stop for months, barely seeing daylight between shifts, and I needed a break. My uncle had a hunting cabin tucked away in the Montana wilderness, about 20 miles from the nearest paved road. No electricity, no running water, just a wood stove, a hand-pumped well, and a whole lot of silence. It was exactly what I needed. I planned to stay for 2 weeks, maybe a little longer if I was really enjoying it. I packed plenty of food, fuel for the lanterns, extra clothes, and my uncle's old rifle just in case. By the time I made it up the long, rutted trail and saw the cabin standing there, half buried in the snow, I felt that kind of exhaustion that settles in deep. The first couple of days were peaceful. The only sounds were the wind against the trees, the crackle of the wood stove, and the occasional groan of shifting ice on the river about 100 yards downhill. I spent most of my time reading, splitting wood, and taking short hikes through the trees. The air was sharp with the smell of pine and snow. It felt safe. That feeling didn't last. On the fourth night, the wind picked up. I was sitting by the stove, staring at the embers, when I heard it howl through the trees like a living thing. The roof creaked, the windows rattled in their frames, and snow hit the cabin in waves. I figured I'd be snowed in for a day or two, but I wasn't too worried. I had enough supplies. The next morning, I had to push the door open with my shoulder. Snow had drifted almost to the windows. I spent half the day shoveling out a path, my breath coming in thick clouds. The storm wasn't over yet, just pausing, gathering itself for another round. By evening, it hit harder. The temperature dropped fast, and the cabin felt smaller and smaller, pressed in by the weight of the storm. I went to bed early, listening to the wind. Then, at some point in the night, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. A deep, sharp crack like a gunshot. I bolted upright, heart hammering. Then another crack, and a groaning, splintering noise, like something massive shifting in the darkness. A tree. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, grabbed my boots, and reached for the lantern just as another crack rang out. This one was close. Too close. I barely had time to react before the whole cabin shuddered. The ceiling above me warped, a terrible groaning filling the air, and then the roof caved in. Everything happened at once. Wood snapped like brittle bones. A crushing weight slammed down on me, pinning me before I could even think to move. I was buried in darkness, caught between broken beams and packed snow. Couldn't breathe. It took me a second to realize what had happened. A tree had come down right on top of the cabin. The walls had buckled, the roof had collapsed, and now I was trapped under it. Panic surged through me, fast and sharp. I tried to move, but something heavy pinned my right leg. My arms were free, but there was no light, no sense of space, just the suffocating press of broken wood and snow. I sucked in a breath, but the air was thin and sharp with sawdust. I coughed, my chest tightening. The weight on my leg wasn't budging, and my fingers were already going numb from the cold. I needed to get out. I reached up, feeling splintered wood and frozen debris above me. I pushed, but nothing moved. Snow poured down in a cold rush, filling my collar. My breath came faster, fogging up the tiny pocket of air I had left. I forced myself to stop, to think. I couldn't afford to panic. I shifted as much as I could, testing how much room I had. My left leg was free, my right leg still trapped. My arms were pinned in a way that let me move them, but not with much strength. I felt around blindly, my fingers brushing something solid, a broken beam. I shoved at it, gritting my teeth against the burning in my arms, but it barely budged. The wood was too heavy. I swallowed hard. The cold was already creeping in. My body was shaking, my fingers stiff and slow. If I didn't get out soon, the cold would do the job for the tree. I took a deep breath and started digging. I clawed at the snow with numb fingers, pushing it away from my chest, clearing a little more space to move. The more I cleared, the better I could breathe. I found the edge of the beam on my leg, but it wouldn't move. I needed leverage. I reached blindly for anything useful, something solid, something I could use to wedge the beam up just enough to free my leg. My hand found a piece of broken wood, sharp and jagged. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I jammed it under the beam and pushed. Nothing. I adjusted, braced my free leg against whatever I could, and shoved harder. It moved, barely. I shifted, dug my heel in, and pushed with everything I had. The beam groaned, lifted an inch, just enough. I yanked my leg free. Pain shot through it, sharp and blinding, but I didn't stop. I dragged myself forward, feeling my way through the broken remains of the cabin. I had no sense of direction, no idea where the door had been, but I kept moving. Snow poured down from above as I pushed through the wreckage. My breath came in short gasps, every muscle screaming. The cold had sunk deep into my bones, but I ignored it. I reached up, found open air, and forced myself through. I tumbled out into the snow, sucking in deep, ragged breaths. The wind cut through me like a blade, but I didn't care. I was out. I lay there for a second, staring up at the sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick silence. Stars glittered overhead, cold and distant. The cabin was gone. A massive pine had crushed it almost completely, burying everything under splintered wood and snow. If I had been sleeping just a few feet to the right, I wouldn't have made it out. I tried to stand, but my right leg buckled. Pain flared through my ankle, twisted, maybe broken. I gritted my teeth and forced myself up. I couldn't stay here. I had no shelter, no supplies, nothing. My truck was a mile down the trail, but in this cold, with an injured leg, that mile might as well have been 20. But I didn't have a choice. I started moving. Every step was agony. My breath came in sharp gasps, the cold biting through my clothes. The trees loomed around me, silent and dark. I kept going. I lost track of time. My body felt heavy, my legs stiff. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to rest. But I knew if I sat down, I wouldn't get back up. I stumbled, fell, dragged myself back up. Then finally, headlights, my truck. I practically collapsed against it, fumbling for the keys with numb fingers. I got the door open, climbed in, and turned the engine over. I sat there, shaking, as the vents blasted warm air over me. My hands were raw, my leg throbbing, but I was alive. I was alive. I don't know how long I sat there, just breathing, watching the ruins of the cabin disappear in the rearview mirror as I drove away. The mountains don't care if you live or die. That night, I almost didn't make it. The cabin had been sitting empty for years. My uncle had bought it cheap, probably too cheap, off some old man who wanted nothing more than to get rid of it. It sat deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town, and even farther from any neighbors. The kind of place you go when you want to be left alone. I don't know what made me decide to go out there that weekend. Maybe I just needed a break from everything. Work, traffic, the constant noise of the city. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle being alone in the middle of nowhere. Either way, I packed up my truck and drove the 3 hours it took to get there. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, then from gravel to dirt. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches heavy with early autumn leaves. It was beautiful in that quiet, empty way that made you feel like the last person on earth. The closer I got to the cabin, the rougher the road became, until it was more of a path than a road at all. My truck bounced over deep ruts, and I had to slow down to a crawl just to keep from bottoming out. The cabin itself wasn't much to look at, just a simple one-story structure with a tin roof and a small porch. The wood was faded, and the front door stuck when I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood, the kind of scent that tells you no one's been here in a long time. There wasn't much inside. A small kitchen with an old propane stove. a wooden table with 2 chairs, a couch that looked like it had seen better days, a single bedroom in the back with a narrow bed and a dresser missing half its drawers. No electricity, no running water, just a well outside and an old wood stove for heat. I set my bag down and walked around, getting a feel for the place. The windows were dusty but intact. The walls were solid. No sign of rodents or anything living inside. It wasn't much, but it would do for the weekend. I spent the rest of the afternoon collecting firewood and making sure the old stove still worked. The sun was already getting low by the time I finished stacking the wood on the porch. Out here, without streetlights or headlights, darkness settled in fast. By the time I stepped back inside, I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I lit a lantern and set it on the table, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The wind had picked up outside, rustling through the trees and making the old cabin creak. It was the kind of night where you couldn't see more than a few feet past the porch, where the woods turned into a solid wall of blackness. I made a simple dinner, just some canned soup heated over the stove, then sat at the table listening to the silence. It was strange, being somewhere so quiet. No cars, no voices, no hum of appliances. Just the wind outside and the occasional pop of the wood in the stove. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easy. The bed was stiff, the sheets smelled old, and the silence was almost too much. Every time the wind shifted, the cabin creaked, and I'd jerk awake, my heart pounding. It took a long time to convince myself there was nothing out there. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of something moving outside. It was subtle at first, just the faintest crunch of leaves. I lay still, straining to hear. The wind had died down, leaving the woods eerily silent. Then there it was again. Slow, deliberate footsteps just outside the cabin. I sat up, my pulse hammering in my ears. My first thought was an animal, a deer or maybe a raccoon, but something about the way it moved felt off. Too steady, too controlled. I reached for the lantern, careful not to make a sound as I turned it up. The soft glow barely reached the far corners of the room. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, listening. The footsteps stopped. I stood there, my breath shallow, waiting. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling or a branch falling outside. Then the doorknob rattled. Not hard, not enough to open it. Just a slow, testing twist, like someone seeing if it was locked. I froze. The cabin had no locks, just an old metal latch that barely kept the door shut. I took a slow step back, my mind racing. Who the hell would be out here? There was no road leading past the cabin. No reason for anyone to be this deep in the woods. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs. The latch didn't move. The door didn't open, just silence. I reached for the fire poker by the stove, gripping it tight. If someone tried to come in, they'd find out real quick that I wasn't just going to sit there and let it happen. Minutes passed. Nothing. I forced myself to take a slow breath. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe the latch had shifted on its own. I inched toward the window, careful to stay in the shadows. The glass was dirty, but I could just make out the porch in the dim light of the lantern. Empty. I let out a slow breath, my grip on the poker loosening. Maybe it really was nothing. I turned away from the window, and something knocked on the wall. Not the door, not a random creak. A deliberate, solid knock, right against the wooden planks. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knock came again, 3 times. I gripped the poker so tight my knuckles ached. Every instinct in my body screamed to run. But where? The truck was parked just outside, but that meant stepping onto the porch. And if someone was out there, the knock didn't come again. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting, listening. The silence was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, I moved. Slow, careful steps toward the door. I reached out, fingers barely touching the latch. I threw it open. The porch was empty. The trees stood still, unmoving in the night air. The lantern cast long shadows across the worn wooden boards, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I'd heard. I grabbed my keys, my bag, anything I could carry in one hand, and stepped outside. The truck was just a few feet away. I yanked the door open, tossed my stuff inside, and slid behind the wheel, locking the doors. The engine roared to life, and I threw it into reverse, my headlights cutting through the darkness. As I turned onto the narrow path, I risked one last glance at the cabin. And that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the trees. Not moving, not running, just watching. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just hit the gas and drove, the cabin disappearing behind me. I never went back. A few weeks later, my uncle called. Said some hikers had found the place broken into. Door wide open, furniture overturned, like someone had been looking for something. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't want to know who or what I had nearly met that night. The cabin wasn't mine. It belonged to my uncle, though he rarely used it. It sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest paved road, and had no electricity or running water. Just a simple wooden structure with a metal roof, a wood-burning stove, and a porch that creaked under the weight of even a small animal. It was the kind of place people imagined when they thought of getting away from it all. Isolated, quiet, surrounded by endless trees. I went there alone. It wasn't meant to be a long trip, just a few days to clear my head. Work had been draining, life had been stressful, and I needed a break. The cabin seemed like the perfect place. I brought what I needed: food, water, firewood, a lantern, and my rifle just in case. My uncle had warned me about bears and mountain lions in the area. Keep your food sealed up tight, and don't go wandering off after dark, he had said. It was good advice. I intended to follow it. The first day was uneventful. I arrived in the late afternoon, parked my truck at the end of a dirt path, and hiked the last half-mile to the cabin. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The forest was thick with towering trees that blocked most of the sky. Birds chirped in the distance, but otherwise, it was silent. Too silent. I shook off the unease that came with being alone in the wilderness. It was just the quiet. Nothing to be worried about. Inside, the cabin was just as I remembered it, bare bones but functional. A cot in the corner, a small wooden table with a single chair, shelves lined with canned goods and old camping supplies. A pile of firewood sat next to the stove, dry and ready to use. I set my gear down, unpacked, and got a fire going before it got too cold. That night, I barely slept. The woods were too alive. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me sit up and listen. It could have been anything: wind, an animal, even the house settling. But in the dark, alone, everything felt more threatening. I kept my rifle next to me, hand resting on the stock, just in case. By morning, I felt foolish. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and nothing had happened. I made coffee over the stove, ate a quick breakfast, and spent most of the day hiking, exploring the area around the cabin. I found a small stream, followed it for a while, and even stumbled upon an old hunting blind half-collapsed from years of neglect. It was peaceful. That changed on the second night. It started with footsteps, not animal footsteps, human ones. I had been inside, reading by lantern light, when I heard them. Slow, deliberate, coming from the trees behind the cabin. The kind of steps someone takes when they're trying to be quiet. I froze, listening. Then nothing. Silence. I stood up, my heart hammering. I grabbed the rifle, moving toward the window. I couldn't see anything, just darkness and the faint outline of trees. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again. Closer. I turned off the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. My eyes adjusted slowly. The fire in the stove cast a faint glow, but beyond that, I couldn't see much. I waited, holding my breath. Still nothing. After a while, I convinced myself it had been an animal. A deer, maybe. Something large enough to sound like a person but harmless. Still, I kept the rifle close, my nerves on edge. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I went outside to check. The ground was soft from the rain a few days prior, and sure enough, there were footprints. Human. deep impressions in the dirt, circling the cabin. Whoever had been out there had walked around the place, stopping near the windows, watching. I swallowed hard. Could have been a hunter, lost and looking for shelter. Could have been a camper passing through. But why wouldn't they have called out? Why sneak around in the dark? I scanned the woods, rifle in hand, but I saw nothing. The trees stood still. The air was calm. I decided to stay one more night. Looking back, I don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe. I didn't want to scare myself into leaving. I told myself it was just someone passing through. No big deal. That night, I locked the door and bolted the shutters. If someone was out there, they wouldn't get in easily. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something tapping against the cabin wall. Light, rhythmic, like fingers drumming on the wood. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath, gripping the rifle. The sound stopped. Then, a long, slow drag, like something being scraped along the side of the cabin. I stayed still. Then footsteps, heavy, right outside the door. Couldn't breathe. Whoever it was stopped right outside. Then, slowly, the doorknob turned. Locked. A long pause. Then, footsteps again, moving toward the window. I stayed still, barely even blinking. After what felt like forever, the sound stopped. No footsteps. No tapping. Nothing. I waited. Minutes passed. An hour. Still nothing. Eventually, I drifted off, exhaustion taking over. By morning, there were more footprints. They led from the treeline to the cabin, circling it again and again before stopping at the front door. Whoever it was had stood there for a long time. I packed up and left. As I hiked back to my truck, I kept looking over my shoulder. The woods felt different now, like something was watching me. I didn't see anyone, but I felt it, that feeling of being followed. I reached my truck, threw my gear inside, and drove off without looking back. A week later, my uncle called. He had gone up to the cabin after I left to check on things. He found something nailed to the door. A single deer skull, clean, bleached white, hanging by a piece of twine. We never figured out who had been out there. I haven't been back since. I didn't plan on spending the weekend alone. My friend Greg was supposed to come with me, but at the last minute he bailed, citing some excuse about work. I should have canceled too, but I had been looking forward to getting away for weeks. A few days in a remote cabin, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence, sounded like exactly what I needed. The drive took longer than expected. The last hour was nothing but winding dirt roads cutting through dense forest, the kind of place where you wouldn't want your car to break down. It was mid-October, and the sun set early, so by the time I reached the cabin, it was already getting dark. The cabin itself was smaller than I expected. Just a simple wooden structure with a porch, a single bedroom, and a wood stove for heat. There was no electricity, no running water, and no cell service. That was part of the appeal. I wanted to disconnect for a few days, clear my head, maybe do some hiking. After unloading my gear, I set about making the place livable. The air inside was musty, the kind of stale scent that comes from being shut up too long. I opened the windows to let some fresh air in, then set about starting a fire in the wood stove. It took longer than it should have, but eventually the fire caught, filling the small space with a comforting heat. Once the fire was going, I stepped outside to gather more wood. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines. There was a woodshed about 30 feet away, its roof sagging under years of neglect. I grabbed a few logs and was about to head back inside when I got the strange sensation that I wasn't alone. I stood still, listening. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the distant call of an owl. Still, the feeling persisted. The woods were dark, almost unnaturally so, the thick canopy blocking out what little moonlight there was. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. Shaking off the unease, I went back inside, bolting the door behind me. I told myself it was just my imagination. Being alone in an unfamiliar place can play tricks on your mind. I made a simple dinner on the propane stove, then sat by the fire, reading by lantern light. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. It had been a long day, and by 10, I was ready for bed. The bedroom was small, just a cot with a thin mattress and an old wooden dresser pushed against the wall. I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the fire crackle in the other room. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly, unsure why. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Then I heard it, a faint sound from outside. Footsteps, not the quick, darting movements of an animal, but slow, deliberate steps, like someone trying to move quietly. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped, then a soft thump against the wall of the cabin. I sat up, my heart hammering. Could have been a branch falling, or some animal brushing against the cabin. But in the silence that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I reached for my flashlight and shined it toward the window. The glass reflected my own face back at me, ghostly pale in the dim light. I couldn't see anything outside. I stayed awake for hours, listening. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside, half expecting to find footprints in the dirt, but the ground was undisturbed. Still, the feeling of being watched hadn't left me. I decided to take a short hike to clear my head. The forest was beautiful, but the further I went, the stronger the feeling became. Every now and then, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, just a flicker of motion between the trees. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. After an hour, I turned back, my nerves shot. That night, the feeling intensified. The footsteps returned, closer this time. A slow, measured pacing just beyond the walls of the cabin. Then the scratching started. Faint at first, barely more than a whisper against the wood. Then more insistent, clawing. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it at the door. The scratching stopped instantly. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I decided I'd had enough. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going to stick around and find out. I packed my things quickly, eager to leave. But as I stepped outside, I stopped cold. Something had been near the cabin during the night. The dirt in front of the porch was disturbed, like someone had been pacing back and forth. And there, in the soft earth, were footprints. Bare human footprints. They led from the tree line to the porch and then back into the woods. I felt sick. Forgetting my plan to calmly pack up, I threw my gear into the car, my hands shaking. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine sputtered but wouldn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I was trapped. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to think. I had food and water, but no way to call for help. I'd have to hike out. I stuffed my backpack with essentials, strapped on my boots, and took one last look at the cabin. The woods felt different now, darker, heavier. I started walking. Every few minutes, I stopped to listen. The forest was silent, too silent. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Someone was following me. I forced myself to keep walking, resisting the urge to run. Running would make noise. Running would show fear. But the footsteps quickened. Panic surged through me. I turned suddenly, shining my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. I started walking again, faster now. My breath came in short gasps. Then, just as I crested a hill, I saw it, the dirt road. My car was useless, but if I followed the road long enough, I'd reach the highway. I broke into a run. For the next hour, I walked as fast as I could, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. But nothing followed. Eventually, I heard the distant rumble of an engine. I waved my arms frantically as an old pickup came into view. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, slowed down, eyeing me warily. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated. If I told him everything, he'd think I was crazy. "My car broke down," I said. He nodded. "Hop in." I didn't look back as we drove away. I never went back to that cabin, and I still don't know who or what was out there that night. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still get that feeling, that I'm being watched. The first mistake I made was assuming the old cabin was empty. The second mistake was staying. I had driven deep into the mountains, far beyond where the paved roads ended. My plan was simple: 3 days alone, just me, the forest, and the quiet. I needed space to clear my head, to disconnect. I told myself it was a well-earned break from work, but if I was being honest, I just needed to be away from people. The drive up had been long, the roads winding higher and higher until the cell service disappeared. I had stocked up on everything: food, water, extra clothes. I had my tent, my sleeping bag, my stove, and even a book, though I doubted I'd get around to reading it. My plan was to hike up a few miles, find a good spot near the lake, and camp there. But then the storm came. I saw it coming before I felt it. Thick, dark clouds rolling in fast, swallowing up the blue sky. The wind picked up, sending dry leaves skittering across the ground, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that I could feel the chill creep under my jacket. By the time I heard the first crack of thunder in the distance, I knew I wouldn't make it to the lake. That's when I saw the cabin. It was old, tucked into the trees like it had been forgotten. The wood was dark with age, the roof sagging in places. There was no road leading up to it, no signs of recent use. I figured it was some abandoned hunting cabin, maybe even a ranger station from years back. At that moment, it didn't matter. The rain was coming fast, and I needed shelter. The door wasn't locked. Inside, it was musty and cold. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something else. Something stale, like old sweat or animal fur. Dust floated in the dim light, filtering through the small windows. The place was bare, just a wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a cot against the far wall. The floor creaked under my boots as I stepped inside. I told myself I would only stay until the storm passed. I set my pack down near the table and took out my flashlight. The walls were covered in deep scratches, long, uneven gouges in the wood. At first, I figured it was from an animal, maybe a bear trying to get in at some point. But the more I looked, the more it didn't make sense. The scratches weren't random. They were clustered around the door and windows, as if something had been trying to get out. Thunder shook the walls. The rain came in heavy sheets, hammering against the roof. I checked my phone out of habit, even though I knew there was no service. No bars, no Wi-Fi, just me and the storm. I set up my sleeping bag on the cot and ate a protein bar, my stomach tight with unease. Something felt wrong about the cabin, but I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just an old building. The scratches were old too. Nothing was here now. Then I saw the footprints. The floor was coated in a thin layer of dust, undisturbed except for the marks left by my boots. But near the door, there was a set of footprints, bare footprints, deep in the dust, leading from the door to the cot, to where I was sitting. My body went cold. I stood up slowly, my breath shallow. The prints were old. Had to be. Dust had settled in some of them, softening the edges. But they weren't ancient. Days, maybe weeks old at most. Someone had been here barefoot, pacing back and forth. The storm raged outside. I tried to ignore the feeling crawling up my spine. I wasn't alone. Not really. Someone had been here before me, and for whatever reason, they left. And they never came back. I forced myself to shake it off. The rain was getting worse. I wasn't going back out in that mess. I unrolled my sleeping bag, keeping my flashlight within reach. I would sleep lightly, just a few hours. The sound woke me up, a soft, slow creak, like weight shifting on an old wooden board. I held my breath, listening. The wind howled outside. The rain pounded the roof. But beneath that, inside the cabin, I heard it again. A floorboard creaking, not from where I was, from near the door. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the room. Nothing, just the empty chairs, the table, the old walls. The door was still closed. I forced a breath into my lungs. It's the wind. The storm was battering the cabin. The old wood was shifting, settling. That's all it was. I turned off the flashlight and lay back down. Sleep didn't come easy. When I woke up again, the storm had stopped. The silence felt thick, unnatural. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face. The air inside the cabin was still. That's when I noticed the door. It was open, just a few inches. My stomach dropped. I had locked it. I knew I had. but now it hung slightly ajar, cold morning light seeping in through the crack. Something had been inside with me. I moved fast, grabbing my pack and yanking the door open. The ground outside was soaked. The dirt turned to thick mud. My truck was still where I had left it, half hidden by the trees. Then I saw them. Footprints, bare, deep in the mud, leading away from the cabin and disappearing into the woods. I didn't think. I ran. I jumped into my truck, my hands shaking as I turned the key. The engine groaned, then roared to life. I slammed it into reverse, tires spinning in the mud before catching. As I pulled away, I looked back one last time. The door to the cabin was wide open now, swinging gently in the wind. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, back on paved roads, back where my phone had signal where I could see people. I don't know who or what was in that cabin before me. I don't want to know. I only know that I wasn't supposed to be there, and that whatever left those footprints might still be out there, watching, waiting, for the next person who makes the same mistake I did. The sky turned red as the last light of day stretched across the horizon, fading behind the thick pine forest. The air was crisp, biting at my face with the sharpness of an early winter. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, its old wooden walls barely holding in the warmth from the wood stove inside. I had come here alone, hoping for a quiet weekend away from the noise of the city, a few days of ice fishing and reading by the fire. I had no idea that by the end of the weekend, I would be running for my life. I had chosen this place specifically because it was isolated. No cell service, no neighbors for miles, just the sound of the wind pushing through the trees and the occasional crack of ice shifting on the lake. The rental ad had mentioned that the cabin was old but sturdy, with a working fireplace and enough supplies to last through a long weekend. It seemed perfect. Inside, the cabin was simple: one main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a bedroom in the back. The walls smelled like old pine and smoke, a mix of must and ash that had settled into the logs over decades. A single window overlooked the lake, its frozen surface reflecting the pale light of the rising moon. After unpacking my things, I set up my ice fishing gear by the lake, drilling a small hole through the thick ice. The wind had picked up, whistling through the trees as I cast my line. The cold settled deep in my bones, and after a couple of hours with no bites, I decided to call it a night. I reeled in my line, my fingers numb despite my gloves, and headed back toward the cabin. That's when I noticed the first set of tracks. They weren't mine. At first, I thought maybe an animal had wandered close to the cabin, but these tracks weren't like anything I'd seen before. They were long and narrow, pressed deep into the snow as if whatever had made them was heavy. They trailed along the side of the cabin, disappearing into the trees. My stomach twisted as I examined them. They looked almost human, but the stride was too long, the steps too uneven. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, the way the snow had settled. Still, as I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin walls as I stoked the fire. I kept replaying the sight of those tracks in my head, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. A hunter, maybe? Some kind of animal I wasn't familiar with? I convinced myself it didn't matter. I was in the middle of the woods, alone. The last thing I needed was to let my imagination get the best of me. I ate a quick dinner of canned soup and bread, then climbed into the old bed in the back room, pulling the heavy blankets up to my chin. At some point during the night, I woke up. It wasn't the wind that had woken me. It was something else, something I couldn't explain. The cabin was silent, too silent. The usual creaks of the woods settling, the distant groan of ice shifting on the lake. Even the wind outside had all stopped. It was like the entire world had gone still. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like something dragging itself along the cabin walls. My breath caught in my throat as I lay there, motionless, listening. The sound moved, shifting from one side of the cabin to the other, stopping just beneath my window. I wanted to believe it was a tree branch scraping against the wood, but I knew better. The sound was too steady, too purposeful. I held my breath, staring at the ceiling, my body frozen in place. The scraping stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft, wet breath against the glass. My stomach lurched. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The moment stretched, a heavy, unbearable weight pressing down on me. I couldn't see the window from my bed, but I knew something was standing there, just on the other side of the thin glass. I don't remember falling asleep, but at some point, exhaustion won out. When I woke up, the room was dim with morning light. The fire in the main room, nothing but smoldering embers. I forced myself to get up, to move toward the window. My fingers trembled as I pulled the curtain aside. There was nothing there. No footprints, no smudges on the glass. Nothing to prove I had heard anything at all. The wind had picked up again, rattling the trees as I made my way back down to the lake. The ice was solid beneath my boots, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow. I spent most of the day trying to distract myself, keeping busy with fishing and chopping firewood. By the time the sun began to set, I had convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. A combination of being alone in an unfamiliar place and the eerie silence of the woods. But that night, it came back. I had just stoked the fire when I heard it again. The slow, deliberate scraping along the walls. This time, I didn't freeze. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the window, my pulse hammering in my throat. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but snow and trees. But I knew it was there. I could feel it. The scraping stopped. A low, guttural breath filled the silence. So close I could almost feel the warmth of it through the glass. I bolted. I grabbed my keys, my coat, my boots. I didn't care how late it was. I was getting out of there. I threw open the door, stepping out onto the snow-covered porch. And then I saw it. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. It stood at the edge of the trees, its body thin and stretched, its skin pulled tight over sharp bones, its eyes, deep, hollow pits, locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then it smiled. It was a horrible, twisted thing, lips pulling back to reveal too many teeth, too sharp, too long. I turned and ran. I don't remember getting into my truck. I don't remember turning the key or slamming my foot on the gas. But the next thing I knew, I was speeding down the frozen road, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway. I never went back. I called the cabin's owner from the first gas station I found, telling him there was something wrong with the place, that I had left early. I didn't tell him what I saw. I didn't want to hear him call me crazy. For weeks after, I kept waking up in the middle of the night, certain that I could hear that same slow, scraping sound outside my window. I moved to a different apartment. I stopped going on solo trips. But some nights, when the wind is just right, I still hear it. That slow, deliberate scrape. And I know it's still out there, waiting. It started as a simple plan. Spend a few days alone in a remote cabin, get some fresh air, and take a break from the noise of everyday life. I had been working non-stop for months, and the idea of disconnecting from everything sounded perfect. No emails, no social media, no distractions. Just me, the woods, and the quiet. I found the cabin through a rental website. It was advertised as off the grid, sitting deep in the forest, miles from the nearest town. That was exactly what I wanted. The listing mentioned no running water and limited solar power, but I didn't mind. It had a wood stove for heat, a propane stove for cooking, and a well for drinking water. That was enough for me. The drive took nearly 5 hours, most of it on winding back roads. As I got closer, the pavement gave way to dirt, and eventually, I turned onto a narrow, overgrown trail barely wide enough for my truck. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches scraping against the doors as I crawled forward. The sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows through the woods. Finally, I reached the clearing. The cabin sat at the edge of a small meadow, backed by thick forest. It was old but well-maintained, built from dark, weathered logs with a steep metal roof. A single window faced the clearing, its shutters slightly ajar. The front porch sagged a little, and a stack of firewood was neatly piled beside the door. I stepped out of the truck and stretched, breathing in the crisp air. It was completely silent except for the faint rustling of leaves. No traffic noise, no distant hum of civilization. Just the woods. I liked it. The cabin had been left unlocked, just as the owner had promised. Inside, it was small but cozy. A wood-burning stove stood in the corner, with a stack of split logs beside it. A small table sat near the window, and a narrow cot was pushed against the far wall. Shelves lined with canned food and a few old books filled the space above a tiny counter. It was basic, but it had everything I needed. I spent the first couple of hours unpacking and settling in. I lit the stove, boiled some water from the well, and made a quick meal. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped fast. The fire crackled, filling the cabin with warmth, but the isolation started to settle in. There was no cell signal, no way to call anyone if I needed to. That was the whole point, I reminded myself. Outside, the night was pitch black. With no city lights, no street lamps, the darkness was complete. I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the clearing. The trees formed an impenetrable wall beyond the grass, their outlines barely visible against the starlit sky. I listened for anything, an animal, the wind, but there was nothing, just silence. I shut the door, locked it, and lay down on the cot. The fire popped and hissed, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It took a while, but eventually, I drifted off to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It was the kind of waking where your body stirs before your mind catches up, leaving you disoriented. At first, I didn't know why I was awake. The fire had burned low, its glow barely reaching the walls. The only sound was the faint ticking of cooling metal from the stove. Then I heard it, a dull thump, not loud, but distinct. Came from outside, somewhere near the cabin. I held my breath, listening. The sound didn't repeat. Maybe it was just a branch falling, or an animal moving through the brush. Nothing to be concerned about. Still, I felt uneasy. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. Everything looked the same. I hesitated, then swung my legs off the cot and stood up. The floor creaked beneath me as I moved toward the door. I cracked it open just enough to peek outside. Cold air rushed in. The clearing was empty. The trees stood still. The only movement was the swirling mist rising from the damp ground. I closed the door, locked it again, and climbed back into bed. I told myself it was nothing, just the woods settling or maybe a raccoon knocking something over. But I didn't sleep well after that. In the morning, everything seemed normal. Sunlight streamed through the window, cutting through the lingering chill. I made coffee, ate a granola bar, and stepped outside to shake off the unease from the night before. That's when I saw the tracks. They were in the dirt near the porch. Footprints. Not boots. Not shoes. Bare feet. The prints were large, bigger than mine, and they led from the tree line to the cabin. Then they stopped, right at the porch. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Someone had been here. Had they been watching me? Had they tried to come inside? I scanned the woods, searching for movement, but there was nothing, just the trees and the wind. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. My mind raced. Maybe it was just a hiker who had wandered too close. Maybe it was someone from a nearby cabin, though as far as I knew, there weren't any. Maybe a sound stopped me, soft, muffled, from the side of the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped toward the window, moving slowly. My heart pounded in my chest. The floor creaked beneath me as I reached out and pushed the shutters open. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath. Then, just as I turned away, something moved at the edge of the trees. A figure half hidden in the shadows. Watching. I barely had time to react before it turned and disappeared into the forest. I stood frozen for what felt like forever, staring at the empty space where it had been. My mind screamed at me to do something, but what? I grabbed my keys, my bag, and my knife. I was leaving. I locked the cabin behind me and ran to my truck. My hands were shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I threw it into reverse, backing out of the clearing, my tires kicking up dirt. My eyes flicked to the tree line, searching for movement, but I saw nothing. I turned onto the overgrown trail, pushing the truck faster than I should have. Branches scraped against the doors, the tires bounced over ruts, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, miles away. Only then did I let myself breathe. I never went back to that cabin. I didn't contact the owner. I didn't tell anyone what happened, but I still think about it. I think about the tracks in the dirt. I think about the figure in the trees. And I think about the fact that, in the morning light, I had only seen one set of footprints. But in the dirt by the porch, there had been two. I didn't want to be there in the first place. The cabin was a last-minute plan, something my cousin insisted on after our original hiking trip fell through due to bad weather. He knew someone who had a place in the woods, an old hunting cabin that wasn't being used. It wasn't exactly cozy, just a basic wooden structure with a metal roof, an old wood stove, and a couple of cots. It was deep in the woods, far from the nearest road, and we had to hike in about 3 miles just to reach it. The first thing I noticed when we got there was how quiet it was. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing. No birds, no wind in the trees, nothing. Just the sound of our boots crunching on the dead leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The cabin itself was small, built from rough-hewn logs with a heavy wooden door that creaked when we pushed it open. Inside, it smelled like old wood and dust. The walls were bare except for a couple of rusted tools hanging from nails, and the floor was uneven in places. There was no electricity, no running water, just a few old lanterns and a rusty wood stove in the corner. We spent the first couple of hours settling in, gathering wood for the stove, and making sure the place was secure. The front door had a latch but no lock, and there were only 2 small windows, both covered with heavy wooden shutters. It wasn't much, but it would keep out the cold. That first night, I barely slept. The wind had picked up, and the trees outside creaked and groaned. Every so often, I thought I heard something moving in the woods, but when I sat up and listened, there was nothing. My cousin was already snoring, dead to the world, and I didn't want to wake him just because I was feeling uneasy. I told myself it was just the unfamiliar setting, the isolation getting to me. But the next day, things started to feel off. We went out early to check the area, just exploring a little, making sure we had enough firewood to last. About 50 yards from the cabin, we found something strange. Footprints. Not ours. They were fresh, pressed deep into the damp earth, and leading away from the cabin. They were human, but something about them was off. They weren't wearing shoes. Barefoot, deep impressions, the toes spread wide like whoever made them had been walking for a long time. Neither of us said anything, but I could tell my cousin saw them too. We just kept walking, acting like it wasn't a big deal, but I kept looking over my shoulder. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Every so often, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The woods felt different, like they were watching us. That night, I barely ate. My cousin, as usual, didn't seem bothered by anything, but I was on edge. I made sure the shutters were closed tight and stacked extra wood near the door. When we finally lay down, I kept my boots on. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't the wind, wasn't an animal. It was soft, almost deliberate. A slow, steady sound. Asterisk, asterisk, scraping. Asterisk, asterisk. I held my breath, listening. It was coming from outside, near the door. A slow drag of something against the wood. I turned my head toward my cousin, but he was still asleep. The sound stopped. I stayed completely still, staring at the door, waiting. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears I thought whoever was out there might hear it. Then, a new sound. Asterisk, asterisk, the latch moving. Asterisk, asterisk. I sat up so fast my cot creaked. My cousin stirred, muttering something in his sleep, but I didn't care. I was staring at the door, my breath caught in my throat. The latch moved again, rattling softly. Someone was trying to open it. I grabbed the hatchet we'd brought for splitting wood and gripped it so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The latch rattled one last time, then silence. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. My cousin snored quietly beside me, completely unaware. After what felt like an eternity, I finally moved, standing up as slowly as I could. I took a step toward the door, keeping my breathing steady. Then, without warning, a loud bang. Something slammed against the door so hard the whole cabin shook. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. My cousin jolted awake, confused, but I didn't say anything. I just held up a hand, telling him to be quiet. Silence. I crept toward the door, listening. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to back away, footsteps. Slow, steady, moving around the cabin. The shutters. I turned toward the nearest window, my skin crawling. The shutters were closed, but I could hear something outside, moving along the wall. The footsteps stopped, right outside the window. I could hear breathing. Slow, ragged breathing. Then, scratching. Long, deliberate scratches against the wood, right next to the window. My cousin was awake now, sitting up, wide-eyed. He had the hunting knife in his hand, and I could see the fear in his face. Neither of us moved. Then, finally, silence. We stayed like that until dawn, barely breathing. When the first light started creeping through the cracks in the shutters, I finally built up the nerve to open the door. The ground outside was covered in footprints, barefoot, deep, leading from the woods to our door, around the cabin, and then back into the trees. But the worst part? There were handprints on the shutters. Long, streaky smears of dirt, as if someone had pressed their hands against the wood, feeling their way along. We packed up and left within the hour. Didn't even eat, didn't talk about it. Just grabbed our stuff and hiked out as fast as we could. We never went back. Never told anyone either. Who would believe us? But every once in a while, when I'm alone at night, I still hear it. The scratching. I was 13 the last time I set foot in those woods. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, just a quiet change in habit, a place I suddenly no longer wanted to visit. But in the years that followed, I never once thought about going back. The memory of what happened there sat in my mind like a dull weight, something I preferred not to prod at. Even now, when I think about it, I can feel my stomach tighten the way it did that day, the way it did when I realized we were not alone in that clearing. We spent most weekends in the woods near my house. It was a small patch of trees, nothing huge, but big enough to disappear into, big enough to feel like our own secret world. It was separated from the nearby houses by a few fields and a row of overgrown hedges, a little oasis of thick undergrowth and half-forgotten history. My neighbor and I, sometimes with other kids, sometimes just the two of us, treated it like our own private kingdom. We built dens, played chase, pretended to be tribesmen stalking through the undergrowth. The place felt untouched, like it had been waiting for us to find it. The signs of its past were scattered through the woods. A stone path, broken into uneven sections and half-buried under leaves. The remains of an old swimming pool, drained and filled with dirt, its cracked tile walls peeking through like old bones. We made up stories about what the place had been, about the people who had walked these trails before us. But we never saw anyone else there. No hikers, no dog walkers, no old property owner coming back to check on things. Just us. Always just us. That's why the discovery of the clearing should have been more unsettling than it was. It started with the bamboo. A thick wall of it, growing in a tangled mess that cut off part of the forest from the rest. It had always been there, an impassable barrier of green that we never thought to challenge. But after a year of playing in the woods, we decided it was time. We brought an old pair of garden shears, and for hours we hacked away at the stalks, clearing a narrow path. It was slow work. The bamboo resisted, springing back after every cut, the stalks dense and fibrous. Sweat dripped down my back as I sawed at them, hands aching from the effort. But little by little, we made progress. By the time we'd cleared a space big enough to crawl through, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, the light turning golden through the trees. When we finally stepped through, we expected more of the same thick trees, tangled undergrowth, maybe some remnants of the estate. Instead, we found something entirely different. Clearing perfectly round. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of clovers, green and soft, stretching unbroken across the space. No bushes, no fallen logs, no weeds pushing through, just clovers. Felt unnatural, almost too perfect, as if something had kept the rest of the forest from creeping in. Scattered throughout the clearing were small stone statues. At first glance, they looked like garden ornaments, the kind you'd see in someone's backyard. Fairies perched on mushrooms, frozen mid-song, tiny harps and flutes in their hands. But when I looked closer, I felt a slow unease creep in. Every single one had its face smashed off. The heads weren't broken completely, just the faces, leaving behind smooth, empty stone where their features should have been. And in the center of the clearing, half covered in ivy, was a massive stone block. We hesitated, then walked toward it. It was too big to be a table, too solid to be just some leftover chunk of foundation. When we got closer, we saw the faint outlines of an inscription worn into its side, the letters too faded to read. I kicked one of the statues over. It landed in the clovers with a dull thud. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to prove that I wasn't scared. Maybe to break the strange, heavy silence that had settled over us. We circled the block, running our hands over its rough surface. The more we looked at it, the more obvious it became what it was. Coffin. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at it. Long enough for the adrenaline to wear off. Long enough for unease to settle in its place. The statues, the clearing, the stone coffin. It was all too strange, too deliberate. It didn't fit with the rest of the forest, with the wild, tangled undergrowth we knew so well. We left, crawled back through the bamboo tunnel, brushing bits of clover from our clothes. Sat on the swings at the park near the edge of the woods, talking about what we'd found. We told ourselves it was just a weird old estate feature, something forgotten and overgrown. But we also told ourselves that we needed to go back. The next day, we returned with supplies. Sheets of metal, old plywood boards, everything we needed to build a proper shelter. The clearing was too perfect to ignore. It was secluded, hidden from the rest of the woods. If we built our den there, no one would ever find it. The sky was heavy with dark clouds when we climbed back through the bamboo. The woods were quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. We set to work quickly, propping up metal sheets, hammering planks into place. The wind picked up, rustling the bamboo behind us. The clearing felt smaller than it had the day before, the trees pressing in closer. And then my friend made a noise, a sharp, startled yelp. I turned to see him standing next to the coffin, staring down at it. The lid was open, not completely, just enough for a person to slip through. A cold, sick feeling spread through my stomach. We had struggled to move that lid, pushing and heaving against its weight with all our strength. And now, here it was, shifted just enough to leave a dark, gaping space. I stepped closer, my breath caught in my throat, peered into the gap. Nothing but darkness. The wind rose, shaking the trees. A drop of rain hit my cheek, then another, the first patters of a storm rolling in. I whispered one word, run, and we did. We crashed through the undergrowth, feet pounding against the forest floor. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drenching us, making the ground slick beneath us. Branches whipped against my arms, my legs, stinging with every step. The clearing, the statues, the coffin. I wanted nothing more than to put distance between us and it all. By the time we reached the play park, my chest was heaving, my clothes soaked through. We stood there, gasping for breath, the woods looming behind us. The rain blurred everything into a gray haze, but I swore I could still see the break in the bamboo, the dark tunnel leading back into the trees. We didn't talk about going back. We didn't talk about what we had seen. We just never set foot in those woods again. I've been working as a ranger in Yellowstone for the past 5 years. It's a job I love, being out in the backcountry, away from crowds, surrounded by nothing but land, sky, and wildlife. It can be brutal, it can be exhausting, and at times, it can be downright unsettling. A couple of weeks ago, I had one of those moments. I was out in the Lamar Valley, deep in the backcountry, about 11 miles from the nearest road. That's nothing for this place. Yellowstone is huge, so big that entire corners of it rarely see human footprints. Even in summer, when the park is crawling with visitors, there are stretches of land where you could hike for days and not see another soul. That day, I had set out early. The sun was just cresting the mountains when I started, and by midday, I was deep in the valley, surrounded by rolling grassland. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction. Gentle hills, clusters of sagebrush, herds of bison moving like slow, shaggy rivers through the tall grass. I saw a few pronghorns in the distance, their white rumps flashing as they trotted along. The air was warm, dry, carrying the distant scent of sage and earth. It was a good day, quiet day, until I found the head. I was following a faint game trail through the grass, cutting toward a narrow gulch that I knew held a reliable water source. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just another long hike in the wilderness. Then, up ahead, right in the middle of the trail, something caught my eye. First, I thought it was a rock, or maybe a clump of fur. But as I got closer, my stomach tightened. It was a deer's head, perfectly severed deer's head. I stopped. My brain tried to make sense of it. I've seen animal remains before, plenty of them. I've come across wolf kills, bear kills, carcasses that had been picked clean by scavengers. But this was different. The head was perfectly intact. No blood, no ragged flesh, just a clean, precise separation from the body. It was a doe, young but fully grown. Its eyes were still glossy, untouched by scavengers. Its tongue sat motionless in its mouth. Even the ears were unmarked. There was no sign of struggle, no sign that it had been eaten. No drag marks, no blood splatter, no tracks around it. Just the head, sitting in the dirt, like someone had placed it there deliberately. My skin crawled. I crouched down, scanning the area. The grass was undisturbed. No broken stems, no signs of a chase. If a predator had killed it, there should have been something, something to tell me what happened. Wolves rip and tear at a kill. Bears make a mess. Mountain lions, I've seen their work too. They drag their prey into cover, chew the ribs first, leave scattered remains. Even scavengers, ravens, coyotes, they would have been at it by now. But there was nothing. No body, no tracks, just the head. I stood there for a long time, listening. The wind moved through the grass in slow waves, rattling dry stalks together. In the distance, I could hear the low grunts of bison. Nothing else. No birds, no insects, just silence. I don't scare easily. I've spent enough nights alone in the backcountry to know the sounds of the land. I've had close encounters with grizzlies, heard wolves howling so close they might as well have been breathing down my neck. But this was different, felt wrong. It wasn't just the head itself. It was the way it was left, deliberate, placed, like someone, something had wanted it to be found. I scanned the horizon. Nothing. Just miles of open valley, hills rolling out toward the tree line. No movement. No figures in the distance. And yet, I felt watched. Couldn't shake it. That creeping, prickling sensation at the back of my neck. That feeling you get when you wake up in the middle of the night and know someone is standing in your doorway, even if you can't see them. I wasn't alone. I slowly pulled my bear spray from its holster, keeping my grip loose but ready. I turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning every ridge, every shadow, every break in the grass. Nothing. I had two choices. I could turn back, Put 11 miles between me and that head. Pretend I never saw it. Or, I could keep going. I knew the smart choice, but I kept going. I stepped around the head carefully, not touching it. I walked forward, forcing myself to move slow, measured, like nothing was wrong, like I wasn't feeling my pulse in my throat. The trail curved up a ridge, giving me a vantage point. I turned back, scanning the valley behind me. The head was still there, small in the distance, a dark shape against the pale dirt. Nothing else moved, but the feeling didn't go away. I walked for another mile, maybe two, my pace steady. The land stretched out ahead, golden in the afternoon sun. The air smelled the same. The sounds of bison, wind, distant birds, all the same, but I wasn't. The back of my neck wouldn't stop prickling. I stopped at the edge of a narrow ravine, scanning the ground. There, in the dirt, was something new. A print. Not a bear, not a wolf. Something human, barefoot. The print was deep, clear in the loose soil. The toes splayed slightly, the arch high. A large foot, larger than mine. Maybe a size 14 if I had to guess. But that wasn't what made my stomach knot. It was fresh. No wind-blown dust. No weathering. Someone or something had been here. Recently. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. I looked up, scanned the tree line ahead. Still nothing. I took a step back, then another, and then I turned around and walked. Not fast, not panicked, just steady, controlled. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I walked those 11 miles without pausing, without letting myself think too hard. My hands stayed near my bear spray the whole time. I didn't let myself wonder if I was being followed. I didn't let myself listen too closely. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was dipping low. The sky was streaked with orange and purple. I climbed in, shut the door, locked it, and I just sat there, heart pounding, hands shaking. I've seen plenty of strange things in the wild, but that day, that was the first time I ever truly felt like I wasn't at the top of the food chain. I never found an answer. The next day, I went back with another ranger. The head was gone. No blood, no tracks, just empty trail, like it had never been there at all. The air was crisp that night, the kind of cold that settles into your bones but doesn't quite bite. It was early autumn, and the leaves had just started turning. Their edges browned and curled as they clung to branches above us. The mountains loomed high on either side, their jagged ridges cutting sharp lines against the sky. Above us, the stars spread out in a vast, endless sprawl, the new moon absent, leaving only their dim glow to light our way. We had spent the evening downtown, wandering through small shops, grabbing coffee, talking. It had been a decent first date. Not awkward, not thrilling, just comfortable in that way two people who don't quite know each other try to be. I liked her. She seemed quiet but thoughtful, the kind of person who noticed things without pointing them out. It wasn't love at first sight or anything dramatic like that, but it was easy, and that was enough for now. When I suggested we take a drive up Provo Canyon, she hesitated at first. It was late, past midnight by then, but the idea of a quiet walk under the stars sounded nice, and I reassured her that I knew the trails well. I had spent years rock climbing in the area, scaling its walls, memorizing its winding paths, understanding how the land folded into itself like a crumpled sheet of paper. Felt like home to me, so we drove. The road snaked up into the canyon, cutting through thick trees and rocky outcroppings. The further we went, the fewer lights we saw. The last of the cabins and small roadside houses disappeared behind us, leaving only the dark, winding road ahead. The headlights cut a narrow beam through the blackness, the trees casting long, thin shadows across the asphalt. I parked near the trailhead, pulling onto the gravel shoulder. When we stepped out of the car, the silence pressed in. No hum of traffic, no distant voices, just the sound of our own breathing and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. We started walking. The trail was packed dirt, winding upward at a gentle incline. Without a flashlight, our eyes adjusted slowly, the dim light from the stars barely enough to outline the path. I led the way, stepping carefully, avoiding loose rocks and roots I knew would be there even if I couldn't see them. For a while, it was peaceful. The only sounds were our footsteps on the dirt, the soft crunch of leaves beneath our shoes. The air smelled of earth and pine, damp from the cool night. Occasionally, a branch would creak somewhere in the distance, the sound carried by the wind. Then the feeling came. It was subtle at first, a quiet unease, like walking into a room and forgetting why you went there. It settled in the pit of my stomach, creeping up my spine in a slow, steady crawl. I tried to shake it off. There was nothing out here, nothing to be afraid of. I had been on this trail countless times, day and night. There was no reason to feel this way. But a minute later, the feeling deepened. I glanced back at her. She was still following, her face barely visible in the dark. But something about her posture seemed different. Stiff, cautious, like she felt it too. The path ahead dipped beneath a stretch of trees, where the canopy was thick enough to swallow what little light we had. A tunnel of darkness. The unease sharpened. Something about stepping into that black space felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I ignored it and kept walking. Then, my foot hit something. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a root. It was soft. I stopped. The impact was small, just enough to make me stumble slightly, my weight shifting as my shoe pressed into whatever was there. My stomach tightened. I squinted down, but the darkness was too heavy to make anything out. Something in me screamed to move, to go back, but I ignored it. I crouched down, reaching out, my fingers grazing over skin. Took me a second to understand what I was feeling. Warm, bare, human skin. I jerked my hand away like I had touched fire. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my skull. I didn't know what I had just touched, but my mind raced through every possibility. A deer? A pile of clothes someone left behind? No, it was skin. I scrambled backward, my foot slipping on loose dirt. My hand shot out to steady myself, fingers digging into the cold earth. My eyes darted to the trees, to the darkness around us, suddenly feeling like it was pressing closer, watching. Something was wrong. I stood up fast. My head was screaming, go, go, go. I turned back toward her. I could barely see her face, but I could tell she was tense, her body rigid. Like she had heard something, like she felt something. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent that hadn't been there before. Metallic, thick, blood, and then movement. Not from the thing on the ground, from the trees. A shift in the shadows, barely perceptible, but there. Something else was in the woods with us, watching, waiting. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed her wrist and pulled, not running yet but moving, fast and steady. Every nerve in my body was screaming that we had made a mistake coming here, that we had stepped into something we weren't supposed to see. The silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I didn't look back. I didn't try to see what was behind us. I just walked faster, keeping my steps quiet, listening. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. That was enough. We ran. We tore down the path, stumbling over rocks and roots, our breath ragged, our bodies moving on instinct. The sound of our footsteps pounded in my ears, but I still strained to hear anything behind us. A rustle, a breath, a step, nothing. By the time we reached the car, my hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the keys. Took 3 tries before I got the door open. We scrambled inside, slammed the doors, locked them. For a long time we just sat there, panting, listening, staring out into the black woods ahead, waiting for something to step out. But nothing did. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, the headlights flooding the trailhead with light. And for a split second, I swore I saw something move just beyond their reach. I didn't wait. I threw the car into drive and sped down the canyon, not slowing until the trees thinned, until we saw the distant glow of the city lights, until the world felt normal again. We never talked about it after that. Years passed. We got married. Life moved on. Then, one night, we were watching an interview, a documentary on serial killers. The host asked a question. "Was there ever a time you almost got caught?" And he smiled. "There was one time," he said. "I had just killed a girl up in Provo Canyon when I heard voices. A couple walking up the trail. I barely had time to hide before the guy stepped right into the body. He stood there for a moment and I thought that was it. I thought he was going to see her. But then, for some reason, he just left. The room went silent. I felt her stiffen beside me, my own body locked up, frozen. I could still remember the feeling of my foot hitting something soft, the feeling of skin under my fingertips, the metallic scent in the air. We had walked straight into a murder, and he had been there, watching us the whole time." The lake had always been quiet. That was the best thing about it. No public access, no speedboats tearing across the water, no shouting from crowds of tourists. Just the steady lap of water against the shore, the rustle of trees in the wind, and the occasional loon call echoing across the water. Our family's cabin had been there for years, nestled into the thick northwoods like it had grown from the trees themselves. It was a place for fishing, swimming, and campfires. A place where summer stretched long and slow, and the days melted into each other without anything much happening. But across the lake, hidden in the trees, was the old girls' camp. We had all known about it for as long as I could remember. It had been abandoned for years, slowly falling apart as the state let nature take it back. There were old cabins, a collapsed mess hall, and the main house, 2 stories tall, still standing despite everything, its windows dark and empty. None of us had ever really gone over there, though. It wasn't our land, and the place had a way of feeling like it didn't want visitors. But one day, my sister and her husband decided to check it out. They took the canoe across the lake, paddling through the glassy water until they reached the shore on the other side. I wasn't with them. I didn't even know they had gone over there until they came back, pale-faced and shaken. Later that day, they told us what happened. The camp was quiet when they arrived. The trees pressed in close around the edges of the property, thick and untrimmed, branches reaching over the broken buildings like they were trying to pull them back into the forest. The air smelled damp, rotting wood and lake water. They stepped onto the shore, dragging the canoe up just enough so it wouldn't float away. There was no sound except the soft slosh of water and the distant creak of trees swaying in the wind. The main house was the biggest building on the property, sitting slightly apart from the ruins of the other cabins. Its roof sagged in places, but the walls still stood. The front porch had missing boards, and the railing had long since fallen away, leaving jagged posts behind. They stepped inside. The air was stale. The floor was littered with dirt, leaves, and old papers that had yellowed with time. The windows were mostly intact, though some were cracked, and the sunlight filtering in was weak and dust-filled. They walked through the downstairs rooms first. An old fireplace stood in what must have been a gathering room, its stone hearth chipped and blackened with age. The kitchen had a rusted-out sink and an old icebox, the door hanging open. There were shelves still holding a few broken dishes and metal cans too rusted to read. Everything was still, dead, until they heard the footsteps upstairs. Heavy, slow at first, the distinct sound of boots pressing into old wood. Then the steps picked up. Someone was running. They weren't creeping, weren't trying to be quiet. Whoever it was wanted them to know they were there. The footsteps pounded across the upstairs floor, moving toward the staircase. My sister and her husband didn't wait to see who it was. They turned and ran. As soon as they bolted for the door, they heard the footsteps hit the stairs hard, fast, coming down after them. They ran outside, their feet slamming against the soft earth. The old porch groaned under their weight as they leaped off it. But the footsteps didn't stop. Whoever had been upstairs was now on the first floor. They could hear them moving fast, closing in as they ran around the side of the house. They didn't go toward the lake, didn't go straight for the canoe. That would have been too easy to cut off. Instead, they went deeper into the camp, weaving between the rotting cabins, the collapsed mess hall, the overgrown trails. Behind them, the footsteps followed, not running in a straight line, not coming out into the open. Whoever it was, they weren't chasing blindly. They were moving carefully, deliberately, staying just far enough back that they were never quite seen. My sister and her husband kept going. They ran past the last cabin and into the tree line, branches whipping at their arms and legs. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Their lungs burned. For a few moments, they didn't hear anything but their own footsteps, their own breathing. Then, deep in the woods behind them, footsteps. Someone else had entered the trees. They weren't running full speed. They weren't crashing through the undergrowth. They were pacing them. There was no trail, no clear way forward. Just thick woods, uneven ground, fallen logs half hidden under ferns. But they kept going, moving as fast as they could without completely losing their footing. The footsteps in the trees stayed with them, always just out of sight. At one point, they stopped, listened, tried to hear where the person was. But everything had gone silent. No birds, no wind, no footsteps. That was worse. They pushed forward again, heading toward the farthest side of the lake. The long way around. The sound didn't follow immediately, but when it came again, closer this time, it was sudden, as if whoever it was had been waiting for them to move first. They didn't stop again after that. They ran. Took them hours to get back. By the time they saw the familiar shape of our family's cabin through the trees, they were covered in sweat, their clothes torn from branches, their legs shaking. They didn't hear the footsteps anymore. They didn't stop to look back. They just went inside. My dad and I went back later that evening to get the canoe. I didn't think much of it at the time. My sister and her husband hadn't told us the full story yet, just that they had a bad feeling and left in a hurry. So when my dad and I paddled across the lake, I wasn't expecting anything strange. We reached the shore. The canoe was still there, just where they had left it. The camp was just as silent as ever, the buildings sitting empty in the trees. No movement, no sound, nothing. We pulled the canoe back into the water, climbed in, and started paddling back. Halfway across, I looked back at the camp. The main house stood tall against the dark trees, its second-story windows looking out across the water. I had the strangest feeling that someone was standing inside, just behind the glass, watching, but I never saw anything. We had been planning the trip for a while. Baja California's Laguna Salada was known for its wide, open spaces, perfect for watching the Milky Way. No city lights, no noise, just endless sky and silence. As graphic design students, we wanted to experiment with star trail photography, capturing the slow movement of the stars over time. It was supposed to be a quiet, creative night with friends. Nothing more, but things never go how you expect. We left Mexicali in the late afternoon, driving west along the highway toward La Rumorosa. The sun hung low, turning the landscape gold. The road stretched ahead in a straight line, cutting through flat desert and scattered brush. Laguna Salada wasn't really a lagoon anymore. It had been a lake once, but it dried up long ago. Now it was an endless stretch of cracked earth and hardened salt, the remains of an ancient sea. If you looked closely, you could still find bleached seashells buried in the dirt, remnants of a time when water covered everything. We took an unmarked dirt road off the highway, slowing down as the car bumped over uneven terrain. Dust rose behind us in thick clouds. After about 500 meters, we found the perfect spot. One side was open and flat, perfect for photos. The other side had thick bushes, giving us some cover from the highway. ***, we figured this was ideal. Headlights from passing cars wouldn't ruin our long exposure shots. We parked, turned off the engine, and stepped out. The second our feet hit the ground, we noticed it. A sound. Not just one sound, but many. A strange hissing, rattling noise all around us. It was subtle at first. A soft, whispering shake, like hundreds of tiny maracas being played in the distance. Then, as we stood still and listened, we realized it was everywhere. Some were faint, coming from deep in the darkness. Others were closer, almost next to us, though we couldn't see anything. We exchanged glances, puzzled. Someone joked about aliens while others tossed out ideas, maybe echoes from the highway, maybe bugs. We didn't think much of it. Just another weird desert mystery. We should have paid attention. Instead, we set up the camera, adjusting the tripod and fine-tuning the focus. A few test shots later, everything was ready. We locked the shutter for a long exposure, leaving the camera to do its thing. Then we grabbed our flashlights and decided to explore. We walked for about 15 minutes, heading toward the darker parts of the dry lake bed. The air was cool now, and the silence felt heavier the farther we got from the car. The rattling sound had faded into the background, still there but easy to ignore. We talked, laughed, shined our lights at the ground, hoping to find seashells or cool rocks. Then, out of nowhere, one of my friends froze. His voice dropped to a whisper, low and strained. Asterisk, 2 men are coming at us. Asterisk. We stopped. The words didn't register at first. I thought he was joking, but something in his voice, asterisk asterisk, that raw fear asterisk asterisk, made my stomach drop. Asterisk, not kidding. 2 men are coming at us, and they have assault rifles. Asterisk. Time slowed. Then we saw them. 2 shadows walking toward us fast. Then came the voices. Asterisk asterisk, loud, aggressive, commanding. Asterisk asterisk. Asterisk. Turn off the flashlights. Turn them off now. Asterisk. The fear hit all at once. We shut off our lights immediately, standing there in total darkness. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I could hear it. Footsteps crunched against the dry earth. The men were getting closer. We couldn't see their faces, only the silhouettes of their weapons. Asterisk, don't move. Keep your hands down. No sudden movements. Asterisk. We did exactly as they said. No one spoke. No one breathed. Asterisk asterisk. Then came the questions, fast and aggressive. Asterisk, who are you? Asterisk. Asterisk. What are you doing here? Asterisk. Asterisk. How old are you? Asterisk. Asterisk. What are your names? Asterisk. Asterisk. How long have you been here? Asterisk. We answered, trying to keep our voices steady. Just students. Just taking photos. Just here for the stars. They whispered to each other, their voices low but intense. One of them still had his rifle pointed at us, finger resting near the trigger. In my head, I was sure this was it. We were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I thought about my family, my past birthdays, my old high school crush, my stupid Super Nintendo I got for Christmas as a kid. I got angry. This is how I die. Shot in the back by some cartel asshole just for taking photos. Asterisk asterisk. One of them finally spoke again. Asterisk. Go back to your car and keep taking your photos. But do not go near that bush patch because... Asterisk. He paused. Asterisk. Rifles tend to misfire in there. Asterisk. I didn't need to be told twice. We turned slowly and started walking back, our flashlights still off. Every step, I expected to hear gunfire. I waited for the sudden impact, the hot sting of bullets tearing through my back. But nothing happened. We kept walking, our legs shaking, our hands numb. When we finally reached the car, we grabbed our gear as fast as we could, tossing everything inside. No one spoke. We didn't need to. We got the fuck out of there. The adrenaline was still pumping as we packed up, hands trembling, stuffing tripods and cameras into the trunk. I just wanted to leave, to be back on the highway, back where the world felt normal again. Then asterisk asterisk, a noise. Asterisk asterisk. A sharp, dry rattle right next to us. One of my friends froze, his eyes going wide. I turned my flashlight back on, pointing it at the ground. And there it was, a baby rattlesnake, coiled, its body tense, its tiny rattle shaking like crazy. It was inches from my friend's foot. We had been hearing them the entire time. The sound, the one we ignored, the one we brushed off as just the wind or insects. It had been hundreds of rattlesnakes all around us. We had been standing among them, walking past them, stepping over them without even knowing. I was about 14 or 15 when this happened. A group of my friends and I had gone on a camping trip somewhere in central Texas. I don't remember exactly where, but it was one of those places where the trees stretched forever, where the dirt was dry and hard-packed, and where the night air had that deep, quiet stillness that makes you feel like the only person left in the world. It wasn't a big group, just a few of us, maybe 4 or 5, all crammed into a couple of tents pitched on a flat clearing near a tree line. The day had been normal enough. We'd spent most of it hiking, sweating under the heavy sun, and talking about stupid things that didn't really matter. Video games, girls, school, things like that. When the sun started setting, we gathered wood for a fire, cooked up some canned food and hot dogs, and sat around talking until the flames burned low. One by one, we drifted off to sleep, crawling into our tents, the laughter dying down until all that remained was the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustling of wind through the trees. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up. I didn't know why at first, just that I was uncomfortable, the way you are when you know something isn't right. Then it hit me, I had to piss. Badly. I groaned quietly and tried to ignore it, shifting in my sleeping bag, but it was no use. The feeling wasn't going away, and I knew that if I didn't get up, I'd just end up lying there in discomfort, wide awake. Carefully, I unzipped the tent and crawled out, stepping onto the cool dirt. The night air was thick and humid, the kind that clings to your skin. The campfire had burned down to embers, casting only the faintest orange glow. Everything else was black. No moon, no stars, just a wall of darkness stretching out in every direction. I took a few steps away from the tent, careful not to make too much noise. I didn't want to wake the others, and besides, I didn't need to go far. Just enough to find a tree, do my business, and get back to the tent as fast as possible. I picked a tree that wasn't too far but not too close either, just far enough that I felt alone but not isolated. I unzipped my pants and let out a relieved sigh as I started peeing, staring off into the darkness, my mind half asleep. Then I heard it, a crunch, just ahead of me, maybe 20 feet away, a distinct, deliberate crunch of leaves. My body tensed immediately. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a small animal scurrying through the brush. It was heavy, like something big was moving. My eyes hadn't fully adjusted to the dark yet, so I squinted, trying to make out what was in front of me. At first, I saw nothing but shadows. Then, slowly, something took shape. A pair of glowing yellow eyes. They were fixed on me, unblinking, steady. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The only sound was the steady stream of urine hitting the dirt, but I barely noticed. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the blood pounding in my ears. It was big. I could make out the shape now, the faint outline against the black. A low, sleek body, a long tail curled behind it. It was crouched slightly, shoulders hunched, muscles tensed. It looked like a cat, a massive cat, a mountain lion. I was sure of it now. I had seen pictures before, but never in real life. Never this close. It didn't move. It just stared. I stood there, paralyzed, my brain scrambling for what to do. Run? No, bad idea. Running would trigger its instinct to chase. Yell? I didn't want to wake the others and cause a panic. Stay still? That seemed like the best option, but I wasn't even sure. I forced myself to breathe slowly. My hands were shaking. Then, just as I finished peeing, it made a sound. A low, breathy hiss. It wasn't a snarl, not a growl. Just a slow, deliberate hiss, like a warning. I didn't move. I barely even blinked. I knew in some deep, primal part of my brain that this thing was deciding what to do. It was looking at me like prey, weighing its options. The seconds dragged. I could feel sweat dripping down my back, though I wasn't sure if it was from the humidity or sheer terror. Then, finally, it turned. With slow, deliberate movements, it took a step back, then another. It didn't run, didn't slink away in fear, just calmly walked into the darkness, as if deciding I wasn't worth the trouble. I waited until I couldn't see its eyes anymore, until the silence stretched long enough that I was sure it was gone. Then, carefully, I took a step backward, then another, keeping my eyes locked on the last place I'd seen it. My breathing was shallow. My legs felt weak. When I reached the tent, I crawled inside and zipped it shut in one smooth motion. I lay there, heart pounding, body drenched in sweat, ears straining for any sound outside. Nothing. I don't know how long I lay there, too scared to move. Maybe an hour, maybe longer. At some point, exhaustion won over fear, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I didn't say anything to the others. Part of me didn't even believe it had really happened, that maybe I had imagined it in the haze of half-sleep. But when I stepped outside, I saw the tracks. Big paw prints in the dirt, right where I had been standing. Deep impressions, clear as day. And just like that, I knew it had been real. I never told my friends. Maybe I should have, but I didn't want them to think I was making it up, or worse, that I had almost gotten myself killed taking a piss in the middle of the night. Even now, years later, I still think about that moment. That feeling of being watched, of locking eyes with something that could end you in a heartbeat. And the scariest part? It had chosen to let me go. I don't know why I agreed to go. Maybe it was pride, or maybe I just didn't want to look weak. But when my old friend Ben invited me on a backpacking trip deep in the national forest, I said yes without hesitation. The plan was simple. 3 nights, off-trail camping, just us and the wilderness. No designated sites, no marked paths, just a paper map, a compass, and our gear. I wasn't a total novice, but Ben was far more experienced. He'd spent years hunting and hiking in remote areas, and he spoke about the forest like it was an old friend. "You'll love it," he said when we packed up his truck. "Nothing beats the solitude out there." That was the appeal. Being cut off from everything, no cell service, no noise except for the wind in the trees. At least that's what I thought I was getting into. We parked on a dirt road that didn't even have a name on the map. From there, we hiked in for about 5 miles before veering off the faint game trail that led deeper into the woods. The trees stretched high above, thick with summer leaves, casting long shadows that made it feel later in the day than it was. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. At first, I welcomed it. I hadn't realized how much constant noise I was used to. Cars, distant conversations, planes overhead. But here, the only sounds were our boots crunching dry leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. By late afternoon, we reached a clearing next to a small creek. It was a good spot to camp. Flat ground, a fresh water source, and enough open space that we wouldn't feel boxed in by the trees. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and cooked a simple meal as the sky darkened. That first night was uneventful, and I slept surprisingly well. But that was the last time I'd feel at ease in those woods. The second day started normally. We packed up, hiked a few more miles, and found another good campsite before sundown. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and the sun cast golden light through the branches. It should have been perfect, but then we found the bones. Not scattered, not chewed up, but stacked. It was about 50 yards from our site, just beyond a fallen log. At first, I thought it was just a pile of rocks, but as we got closer, the details became clear. A small stack of animal bones. Some looked like deer, others maybe raccoon or rabbit, set neatly in a pyramid shape, stripped clean. No scavenger does that. A predator might leave remains, but they wouldn't organize them. Ben frowned but didn't say much. He kicked at the pile, muttered something about weird hunters, and walked away. I lingered a moment longer, unsettled. There were no footprints around it. No signs of tools, no drag marks, just bones. That night, I didn't sleep as well. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. First, I didn't know why. My sleeping bag was warm, and the air was still. Then I heard it, footsteps. Not the quick, skittering steps of a raccoon or a fox, but slow, heavy strides. I held my breath. The steps were coming from beyond the trees, steady and deliberate. One step, then another, then silence. I strained to hear more, but there was nothing. I told myself it was an animal and forced my eyes shut, listening to my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Morning came, and Ben acted like nothing happened. I didn't mention the footsteps. I convinced myself it had just been my imagination. The third day, we pushed deeper into the woods. The trees thickened, and the land became rougher, with small ravines and steep inclines. We hiked for hours, taking breaks only to drink water and check our bearings. It was late afternoon when we found the second pile. Just like before, stacked bones arranged with care. This time, there was something else. A length of rope, half buried under leaves, coiled neatly beside the bones. That's when the feeling started, the unmistakable sense that we weren't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing just beyond the trees. Then, as the sun dipped lower, we heard it. A branch snapped, not the sharp crack of a twig breaking under a squirrel's weight, but the deep, splintering sound of something heavy stepping on dead wood. I turned my head so fast it made me dizzy. Nothing. Ben grabbed my arm. He wasn't smiling anymore. We need to move. We packed up in silence, walking faster than before. The woods felt different now, tighter, like the trees had closed in on us. Then, just as we reached the top of a small hill, I heard it again. Footsteps, fast, crashing through the brush. Something was following us. Ben must have heard it too because he broke into a full sprint. I didn't think, I just ran. The ground blurred under my feet. Branches whipped against my arms. I didn't care about direction anymore, just distance. Then I heard the breathing. Deep, ragged, too close. I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs screaming. I tripped once, caught myself, and kept going. Then, just ahead, I saw the old logging road. Our way out. We hit the road running. I didn't stop until I reached the truck. We threw our gear inside, jumped in, and locked the doors. Ben didn't even start the truck right away. We just sat there, panting. The woods were still. No movement, no sound. Then I saw it just for a second. A shape standing at the tree line, barely visible in the fading light. Tall, motionless, watching. Ben started the engine, and we tore down that dirt road faster than I thought possible. Neither of us spoke on the way home. We didn't talk about the bones. We didn't talk about the footsteps. We didn't talk about whatever had been chasing us. I haven't been back to that forest since. Maybe it was just a hunter messing with us. Maybe it was something worse. I don't know. But I do know this, those bones weren't left by animals. And whatever was out there, it didn't want us there. It wanted us to run. When I was 13, I spent part of my summer at my grandfather's hunting camp. It was the kind of place that felt stuck in time. An old wooden cabin nestled deep in the woods, far from the nearest town. The place smelled like damp wood and gun oil. The floors creaked under every step, and the screen door banged whenever someone let it slam. It was the kind of camp where stories of bears, lost hunters, and strange happenings were passed around like they were just as much a part of the land as the trees themselves. That summer, my uncle had just bought a new hunting camera and wanted to test it out. He set it up somewhere out in the woods to see what kind of wildlife he could catch on film. It didn't take long for me to come up with what, at the time, I thought was a genius idea. I figured it would be hilarious if, instead of deer or coyotes, the first thing he saw when he checked the camera's memory card was my bare ass. A perfect prank, especially for a 13-year-old kid. I told my two cousins about it. One a year older than me, the other a year younger, and after some convincing, they were in. But we had to be smart about it. If we went during the day, there was a chance someone would see us sneaking off, and we'd have to explain why we were heading straight for the camera. So we decided to go under the cover of darkness, sometime in the dead of night when the rest of the camp was asleep. We set our alarms for 3 a.m. and went to bed early, but I barely slept. I kept waking up, checking the clock, waiting for the right time. When the alarm finally went off, I shut it off fast so it wouldn't wake anyone else. My cousins did the same. We got up quietly, pulling on hoodies and jeans, lacing up our boots. Outside, the air was crisp and cool, the kind of early morning chill that seeps into your skin. The only sounds were the distant rustling of trees and the occasional creak of the cabin as it settled in the night. We switched on our headlamps and started walking. The camera was about a mile away, deep into the woods in a valley past the second big hill. The trail was familiar, packed dirt, lined with old pines and scattered rocks, a path worn smooth from years of hunters and hikers. As we moved further away from camp, the trees thickened, and the light from our headlamps bounced off trunks and undergrowth, casting weird shadows that shifted as we walked. At first, we were all giddy with excitement. The thrill of sneaking off in the middle of the night, of pulling off a prank that would make us legends at camp, kept our energy high. But the deeper we went, the quieter we got. It wasn't fear, just a growing awareness of how dark and isolated it was out here. The woods felt different at night, like they stretched on forever. There was no distant hum of cars, no glow from streetlights, just us, our footsteps, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. By the time we reached the top of the second hill, we were barely talking. My older cousin, the one who knew the area best, reached the top first and stopped dead in his tracks. I was right behind him, and as soon as I reached the crest, I saw why. Off in the distance, maybe 400 yards away, a bright blue-white light lit up the hillside. It wasn't a flashlight. It was stronger, steadier. It cast long shadows across the trees, illuminating almost half the hill. The glow was unnatural, too powerful for a headlamp, too controlled to be moonlight. It looked like a spotlight, but there was no clear source. It was just there, beaming out over the hill, cutting through the darkness like nothing I'd ever seen before. My cousin quickly turned off his headlamp. Without thinking, I did the same. We stood there in silence, staring at the light. I tried to make sense of it. A hunter? No, it was too bright. A truck? But where were the taillights, the movement? My mind scrambled for explanations, and none of them made sense. Then the fear kicked in. I was just a kid. My first thought wasn't something logical, it was aliens. My stomach dropped, and I wanted to get out of there now. I turned my headlamp back on, ready to head straight back to camp. But the second my light flicked on, the blue light in the distance moved. Slowly, deliberately, it panned toward us. Not a quick swing, not a shaky bob like someone walking with a flashlight. Just a smooth, controlled turn until it was pointed directly at us. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted down the trail, my boots slamming against the dirt, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My cousins were right behind me, their footsteps pounding alongside mine. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. The only thing on my mind was getting back to camp, getting inside, getting away from whatever that was. We didn't slow down until we were back at the cabin. I tore through the door, heart hammering, and collapsed onto my bed, yanking the blanket over my head like a little kid hiding from monsters. My cousins did the same, no talking, no joking, just silence. None of us slept. By the time the sun came up, I was starting to second-guess myself. Maybe it was just a hunter. Maybe we overreacted. But we had to know. Around mid-morning, after forcing down some breakfast, the three of us headed back out to the same spot. In the daylight, the woods didn't seem as menacing. The trail was just a trail. The trees were just trees. But when we reached the top of the hill, the memory of that light came rushing back. We kept going, moving toward where we thought the light had been. Nothing. No tracks. No boot prints. No tire marks. No broken branches. No flattened grass. Nothing to suggest that anyone or anything had been there the night before. It was just an empty stretch of woods, undisturbed, as if the whole thing had never happened. But we knew what we saw. We felt that light move. We ran from it. To this day, I don't know what it was. Maybe some kind of equipment someone left out there. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe something I'll never have an explanation for. But I've been back to that hunting camp plenty of times since then. And I've never seen that light again. When I was 10 years old, my favorite thing in the world was wandering the woods behind our house. My parents leased the land, and our house sat near the edge of a thick forest. It wasn't ours to do with as we pleased, but it felt like it belonged to me in a way. I spent hours out there, climbing trees, following deer trails, and pretending I was an explorer discovering new land. Sometimes, I'd bring a peanut butter sandwich or a granola bar in my pocket and stay out there for most of the day, coming back covered in dirt and scratches. I wasn't scared of the woods back then. I probably should have been. That day started like any other. The sky was clear, and the sun shone through the trees, making the leaves glow bright green. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. I hadn't planned to go anywhere special, just to explore a little deeper than usual. I knew the property line well, marked by an old rusty fence that stretched through the trees, sagging in places where time and weather had worn it down. I had never crossed it before, but that day I found a gap. It wasn't a small break in the fence. It was a full section where the metal had been bent back, like someone had deliberately pried it open. The edges were twisted and jagged, and the earth beneath it was trampled, as if people had been coming and going for a while. I hesitated. I wasn't supposed to leave our land. My parents had rules about that, but I'd never seen what was on the other side, and my curiosity burned hotter than my fear of getting in trouble. I crouched down and slipped through, careful not to snag my clothes on the sharp edges. The other side didn't look all that different at first. More trees, more underbrush, the same earthy smell. But as I moved forward, I noticed the forest felt different. The air was still, too still, like even the wind didn't want to move through that place. The trees were taller, older, their branches twisting together overhead, blocking out more of the sunlight. The ground was uneven, covered in fallen leaves and tangled roots that seemed to reach for my ankles. Then I saw the clearing. At first, I thought it was just an open patch of land, maybe an old field left to grow wild. But as I stepped closer, my stomach clenched. There was a building in the center, a barn, or at least it had been a barn once. The wood was gray and splintered, the roof sagging in places where whole sections had caved in. The front doors hung open just enough to see darkness inside. The whole thing looked like it was sinking into the earth, forgotten and rotting away. Something about it made my skin crawl. I knew I shouldn't go in. Every part of me told me to turn around, to go back home, to pretend I'd never seen it. But I didn't listen. I stepped forward. The air around the barn smelled wrong. It wasn't just the scent of rotting wood or damp earth. It was something else, something sour and rancid. My nose wrinkled, but I kept moving, drawn in by some mix of fear and curiosity that I couldn't shake. I stepped through the doors, my shoes crunching on dirt and broken glass. Inside, it was worse. The first thing I noticed was the graffiti. It covered the walls, layers and layers of spray paint in different colors, overlapping in a mess of words and symbols I didn't understand. Some of it looked fresh, the colors bright against the aged wood. Others were faded, nearly blended into the decay of the building. Then I saw the mattresses, 2 of them stained and filthy, lying in opposite corners. Trash was scattered everywhere. Crumpled beer cans, fast food wrappers, empty cigarette packs. The remains of old campfires dotted the floor. Deep pits burned into the ground. Broken bottles surrounded them, their jagged edges glinting in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. But the worst part was the stain. A massive, dark brown smear stretched across the floorboards near the back of the barn. It looked like blood. I didn't know for sure, but my stomach twisted at the sight of it. It had soaked deep into the wood, spreading unevenly, like something had been dragged. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but I was frozen, my brain catching up to what my eyes were seeing. The smell was overwhelming now, sweat, mildew, something rotten. Then I heard it, a sound from somewhere deeper inside the barn. A rustling, a shuffle. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was here. I didn't wait to find out who. I turned and ran, my feet slipping on the dirt as I bolted out the door. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I just ran. The trees blurred past me as I sprinted back toward the fence, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The woods felt different now, closing in around me, branches clawing at my arms as I pushed through. I reached the fence in record time, barely slowing as I dove through the gap. Once I was back on my side, I finally stopped, my chest heaving. I listened. Silence. I turned back toward the hole in the fence. Nothing moved. Whoever or whatever had been in that barn, they hadn't followed me. Or if they had, they were hiding, waiting. I didn't tell my parents. I knew if I did, they'd ask what I was doing over there in the first place. They'd yell, ground me, make sure I never got the chance to explore again. So I kept it to myself. But I never went back to that part of the woods again. For weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about the stain, the garbage, the awful smell. I'd lie awake at night, wondering who had been there, what had happened in that barn. What if I had gone deeper inside? What if I had been too slow to run? Even now, all these years later, I still think about it. I don't know if I was ever really in danger that day, but I do know one thing. I was lucky. The first time I ever told this story, I laughed it off like it was nothing, like it was just some weird thing that happened one night. But I don't think I ever really let myself sit with how wrong it was. It wasn't just weird. It wasn't just unsettling. It was something I don't like thinking about for too long, because the more I do, the worse it gets. Started as a normal date night. Me and my ex-girlfriend had the day off, so we did the usual dinner, a movie, nothing special. But after that, we didn't feel like going home just yet. It was one of those nights where the air was warm, the roads were quiet, and everything felt still, like the world was just waiting for us to do something spontaneous. So we decided to go for a drive. No real destination, just driving for the sake of it. The kind of drive where you roll the windows down and let the night air pour in, where the only sound is the hum of the tires on the pavement and the occasional song playing too softly from the radio. We headed out of town, not really thinking about where we were going, just letting the road take us wherever it wanted. After about an hour and a half, we were well outside of city limits, deep into the kind of rural backroads that don't even show up on Google Maps. The only light came from my truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. No streetlights, no houses, just miles and miles of open land and thick tree lines pressing in on either side. The kind of place where, if something happened to you, no one would hear you scream. But I wasn't thinking about that. At the time, all I was thinking about was how we were alone under the stars, how there wasn't a single soul around, and how this was the perfect place to park for a while and do what young couples do when they find themselves in the middle of nowhere with nothing but time. I pulled onto a random dirt road, one of those narrow, overgrown paths that look more like an old ATV trail than an actual road. It was rough going, the truck bouncing as we maneuvered around deep tire ruts and small rocks. The trees on either side were thick, closing in the further we drove. After a couple of minutes, the path opened up into a small clearing, and I pulled off to the side, easing the truck into the edge of the tree line so we wouldn't be visible from the main road, if you could even call it that. I killed the engine, and just like that, the world went silent. There's something about being that far away from civilization that makes silence feel heavier. In the city, even at night, there's always some kind of background noise. Distant cars, the hum of streetlights, the occasional dog barking. But out here, there was nothing. Just the wind through the trees and the occasional chirp of a night insect. For a while, it was perfect. We sat there for a few minutes, talking in hushed voices even though we didn't need to, the way people do when they're somewhere they're not supposed to be. Eventually, we climbed into the back seat, and things started to heat up. And that's when we saw the headlights. At first, I wasn't too worried. It was just a single pair, far off in the distance, slowly making their way down the same dirt road we had turned onto. I figured it was maybe a rancher checking on cattle or some other couple looking for a quiet place. But then the truck kept coming. Closer, and closer, and closer. We scrambled to get dressed, still half expecting to see red and blue flashing lights, but something felt off. The truck wasn't headed straight for us. It was moving slowly, deliberately, like whoever was driving was looking for something. But they weren't looking for us, at least not yet. I held my breath as the truck finally rolled to a stop about 50 feet away. The engine stayed running. The headlights cast long, deep shadows through the trees, flickering as the branches swayed in the wind. Then the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Even in the dim light, I could tell he was older, maybe late 50s, early 60s. He was tall, thin, dressed in an old flannel and jeans that looked more like they'd been worn down to rags. But the thing that really got me was the way he moved. Slow, purposeful, like he wasn't in a rush, like he had all the time in the world. He walked to the bed of his truck and pulled something out. A shovel. He took a few steps away from the vehicle, turned toward the ground, and started digging. At first, I didn't even know what I was looking at. I just sat there, staring, watching this man dig a hole in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night. It didn't make sense. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. The sound of metal scraping against dirt was the only thing in the air. Minutes passed. Maybe 5, maybe 10. I don't know. Time didn't feel real anymore. Then finally he stopped. He set the shovel aside and reached into the hole. And then he lifted something out. I still don't know what it was. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a duffel bag, maybe smaller. It was wrapped in something dark, maybe a tarp, maybe just thick cloth. But I remember the way it sagged when he picked it up. The way it looked heavy. He carried it to the bed of his truck and placed it inside. Then he went back, grabbed the shovel and tossed that in too. And then, just like that, he got back in the truck. For a moment, he just sat there, the engine rumbling, headlights still on. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid he could hear it. I didn't blink. I didn't move. Then, without any hesitation, he put the truck in reverse, backed up and slowly turned around, heading back the way he came. We sat there for at least another 20 minutes. I don't know why. Maybe we were afraid he would come back. Maybe we were just in shock. But I wasn't about to start my truck until I was absolutely sure he was gone. Eventually, when I finally did turn the key, the sound of the engine nearly made me jump out of my skin. I pulled out of the clearing back onto the dirt road, following it back the way we came. I kept the headlights dim, not wanting to be seen, not wanting to give anyone a reason to stop us. We didn't speak, not once, not until we were back on the highway, heading home, the lights of the city finally visible on the horizon. Even then, we didn't talk about it. We just sat there, letting the sound of the tires on the pavement fill the silence. To this day, I have no idea what we saw, and I don't think I ever want to know. I don't know why this story has stuck with me for so long. Maybe it's because of how helpless we felt that night. Maybe it's because, even all these years later, I still don't know what the hell we walked into. I was in middle school at the time, part of a hiking club that met on weekends. It was meant to teach us outdoor skills, reading maps, identifying plants, making campfires, that sort of thing. Our group was made up of kids from different grades, but the trip was led by 2 high schoolers who had been in the club for years. We trusted them to keep us on track, and for most of the day they did. The hike started out easy. It was a mild fall afternoon, the trees still holding onto their last golden leaves. The sun warmed our backs as we followed a narrow dirt trail through the woods, crossing small creeks and stepping over fallen logs. There were about 10 of us, all wearing backpacks stuffed with water bottles and snacks. The 2 group leaders, Mike and Rachel, kept up a steady pace, leading us further into the forest. It wasn't until the sun started dipping low that we realized something was wrong. I don't remember exactly when it happened. One moment, we were walking along a well-worn trail, and the next, the path had all but disappeared beneath layers of dead leaves. At first, no one was too concerned. We'd gotten turned around before on other hikes, and the leaders always managed to figure it out. But as we kept moving, it became clear that they weren't as confident as they were pretending to be. Rachel stopped a few times to check the map. Mike pointed at different trees, trying to find a marker we had passed earlier. Neither of them said outright that we were lost, but the way they whispered to each other made it obvious. The rest of us just stood around, shifting nervously and glancing at the sky. Dusk was coming fast. We picked a direction and kept walking, hoping to find some sign of the trail again. But the woods all looked the same, tall, bare trees stretching up against the darkening sky. The ground was uneven, covered in tangled roots and loose rocks. A few kids tripped, scraping their palms against the rough bark. My own legs ached from walking, and my stomach was starting to twist with hunger. Then the real panic started to settle in. It was dark, not just sunset dark, but real, suffocating darkness. We had a couple of flashlights between us, but they barely cut through the thick shadows pressing in from all sides. Every noise seemed louder. The wind rattled the branches above us. Leaves skittered across the forest floor, and somewhere in the distance, something howled. We kept moving, not because we knew where we were going, but because standing still was worse. It felt like the woods were swallowing us whole. Then we saw the cabin. It was small, barely visible in the dim light. If we hadn't been looking in that exact direction, we might have missed it entirely. It sat in a small clearing, hunched against the tree line like it had been forgotten there years ago. Nobody said anything. We just stared at it, our breath misting in the cold air. The only thing worse than being lost in the woods at night was knowing we might have to spend the night out there. The idea of a roof over our heads, walls, some kind of shelter was too tempting to ignore. Mike and Rachel stepped forward first, moving cautiously toward the front door. We huddled behind them, watching as they knocked. No answer. They knocked again, harder this time. Silence. I think we all hoped someone would answer. Some old hunter, a camper, anyone who could tell us where we were. But no one did. Rachel tried the handle. The door creaked open. I don't know what I expected to see inside. A normal cabin, maybe dusty furniture, a fireplace, something that made it feel lived in. But the second we stepped through that door, every muscle in my body locked up. The walls were covered in writing. Not normal writing. Not neat rows of sentences or even scattered words. Just frantic, overlapping scratches. Lines of text etched deep into the wooden planks. Some of it was barely legible, scrawled so fast it was almost gibberish. And then there were the shoes. They were lined up along one wall. Dozens of pairs. Some small, like they belonged to kids. Others bigger, worn down. No two pairs matched. There were bed frames, too. No mattresses. Just empty metal frames pushed up against the far wall, rusting at the edges. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Felt wrong. Not just eerie, not just old, but wrong. Mike was the first to say something. He told us we didn't have much choice. It was too dark to keep wandering, and staying outside was more dangerous. We had to sleep here. No one liked it. But what else could we do? We sat huddled on the floor, backs pressed against the walls, as far from the scrawled writing as we could get. The air was thick, musty, like the cabin hadn't been opened in years. Every sound made us jump. The wind outside, the creak of the old floorboards. Nobody slept. Not really. Every so often, I thought I heard something outside. Not the wind, not the trees shifting. Something moving. Slow, deliberate steps. I told myself it was my imagination. By the time the first light crept through the cracks in the walls, we were already gathering our things, ready to get the hell out. Nobody wanted to stay a second longer than we had to. We practically ran from that clearing. And the weirdest part? As soon as the sun was up, finding our way back wasn't hard at all. We stumbled onto a dirt road not 15 minutes later. A road that should have been impossible to miss. By noon, we were back at the trailhead. No one talked about the cabin. Not really. Rachel told the club leader what happened, but when they went back to check, they couldn't find it. I don't know if she lied, if she led them in the wrong direction on purpose, or if we just got so turned around that night that we imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw, and I know I never want to see it again.